Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the most disturbing sexual practices of European royalty. What you're about to discover is that these tales are far more scandalous than any fairy tale version you've heard. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. King Henry Roman VIII, the man who turned marital drama into a royal sport, was the kind of guy who'd make even the most seasoned soap opera writers weep with envy. We're talking about a king who racked up 6 wives faster than most people change phone cases. The guy's love life was so tumultuous, it single-handedly gave rise to a new church. Now that's some serious relationship fallout. Let's start with the basics. Henry Roman VIII became King of England in 1509, and right out of the gate, he was a walking paradox. Here was a devout Catholic who eventually told the Pope to take a hike. Why? Because his first wife, the Spanish Princess Catherine of Aragon, couldn't give him a male heir, and divorce wasn't exactly the Catholic Church's forte. So what does Henry do? He kicks off the English Reformation to create the Church of England, where his word was the gospel. Talk about a power move. But let's rewind a bit. Henry's marriage to Catherine was no love match. It was more like a political chess move. Catherine was originally married to Henry's older brother, Arthur, who died just months into the marriage. Henry, then just a young prince, was next in line and married Catherine to keep the alliance with Spain alive. Their union lasted 24 years, which was practically an eternity by his standards. But alas, when Catherine couldn't produce a male heir, Henry's eyes started wandering. Enter Anne Boleyn, the woman who turned Henry's world upside down and backwards. Anne was a lady-in-waiting to Catherine and a master of the art of playing hard to get. She refused to become Henry's mistress, insisting on marriage. This was the catalyst that led Henry to break away from the Catholic Church. By 1533, they were married, and Anne was crowned queen. But Anne's story didn't end with a happily ever after. She gave Henry a daughter, Elizabeth, but no sons. Just 3 years later, Anne found herself on the wrong end of a chopping block, executed on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, charges that many historians agree were trumped up. The price tag for Henry's romantic escapades was no small change. His annulment from Catherine and subsequent marriage to Anne cost him political alliances, and the dissolution of the monasteries he initiated to fund his new church filled royal coffers but left many without their homes and livelihoods. Henry's personal life wasn't just a scandal, it was an economic and cultural earthquake. Now, Henry wasn't one to stay single for long. After Anne, he married Jane Seymour, who finally delivered the much-coveted male heir, Edward. Tragically, Jane died shortly after childbirth, a heavy blow to Henry, but grief didn't keep him down for long. In 1540, Henry wed Anne of Cleves, a political alliance marriage that ended in a quick annulment. Why? He found her utterly unattractive. He famously described her as a Flanders mare, which is more about his inflated expectations than her actual appearance. The marriage lasted 6 months and then got a sweet settlement, becoming Henry's sister in name. Next, Henry married Catherine Howard, a teenager whose fate mirrored Anne Boleyn's. She was executed for adultery after just 2 years of marriage. Finally, he married Catherine Parr, who managed to outlive him. By then, Henry was a bloated shell of his former self, plagued by health issues, including a notorious leg ulcer that could clear a room faster than his temper. Henry Roman VIII love life was not just a personal saga. It was a microcosm of the tumultuous times. His reign saw England transform from a Catholic stronghold to a Protestant nation, with all the accompanying chaos. His marital decisions weren't mere personal whims. They were pivotal moments that reshaped national policy and religious landscape. So when someone tells you that love changes everything, remember King Henry Roman VIII. His love life didn't just change his world. It changed the entire course of English history. In closing, if you're ever feeling down about your own relationship woes, just remember Henry Roman VIII. Your breakups might be messy, but at least they didn't lead to the founding of a new religion or the beheading of a partner. History's got a way of putting things into perspective, doesn't it? So, dear listeners, Having dissected the matrimonial mayhem of England's Henry Roman VIII, let's cross the channel to the court of Louis Roman XIV, where the Sun King didn't just rise. He blazed a trail of decadence that left Europe both dazzled and scandalized. Now, when you think of Versailles, your mind might conjure images of opulent ballrooms, shimmering chandeliers, and those infamous secret passageways that supposedly hosted clandestine royal rendezvous. But hold onto your powdered wigs, because we're about to debunk some of those tales and reveal the gritty reality behind the gilded facade. First things first, secret passageways are the stuff of romantic legends. The idea of hidden corridors where courtiers and royal mistresses flitted about unseen has a certain allure, doesn't it? But let's cut through the fantasy. While Versailles was indeed a labyrinth of rooms and corridors, 700 rooms and over 2,000 windows to be precise, the so-called secret passageways were less about privacy and more about practicality. Louis Roman XIV court was a beehive of activity, teeming with over 5,000 people on any given day, including nobles, servants, and the occasional spy. The passageways were essentially service corridors, ensuring the smooth running of this intricate social machine rather than facilitating romantic escapades. This brings us to the heart of the matter, the power dynamics at play in Louis's court. You see, Versailles wasn't just a palace. It was a stage for political theater, where every move was calculated and every liaison was a strategic maneuver. Louis, who reigned from 1643 to 1715, was a master of using his personal relationships as pawns in his grand game of chess. His liaisons weren't just whispered scandals. They were strategic alliances that bolstered his power. Take, for instance, his long-standing affair with Madame de Montespan. Far from being a simple love affair, this relationship was a power move that helped solidify his control over the nobility. Montespan was as politically astute as she was beautiful, using her influence to sway court decisions and secure positions for her allies. Their liaison lasted from around 1667 until 1681, during which time Montespan bore Louis 7 children. But this wasn't just about progeny. Louis legitimized their children, placing them in strategic positions within the court, thereby weaving his lineage and influence into the aristocratic fabric of France. But power games come with a price tag, and Versailles was no exception. The cost of maintaining such lavish courtly life was astronomical, with estimates suggesting that the annual expenses of Versailles reached the equivalent of nearly 15 million livres, a staggering sum in the 17th century, roughly translating to hundreds of millions in today's money. The economic drain was palpable, as the kingdom's coffers were funneled into the upkeep of this palace of excess. Yet, the spectacle of Versailles was not merely an indulgence. It was a deliberate display of wealth and power. By concentrating the nobility under his watchful eye, Louis ensured that their wealth and potential to rebel was effectively neutered. Speaking of economic consequences, let's not forget the tax burden that helped fund this gilded existence. Louis's wars, his extravagant lifestyle, and the upkeep of Versailles were bankrolled by the peasantry, whose taxes filled the royal treasury. The irony. While the nobility basked in the opulence of Versailles, the average French peasant was toiling away, often facing famine and poverty. The Sun King's reign, while a golden age in many respects, laid the groundwork for the financial woes that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Back to Louis's liaisons. After Madame de Montespan, enter Madame de Maintenon, who was more than just a mistress. She became Louis's secret wife after the death of his first wife, Maria Theresa of Spain. Former governess to Louis's illegitimate children, Maintenon wielded considerable influence over the king, steering him towards more pious and conservative policies. Their relationship underscores the dual nature of royal liaisons, part genuine affection, part political strategy. And what of the mythic parties at Versailles? Those lavish balls and masquerades were indeed real, serving as both entertainment and a means for Louis to display his grandeur. Yet these events were also carefully orchestrated spectacles of power. Invitations were a coveted status symbol, and to be excluded was a mark of disgrace. It was the social equivalent of being unfollowed by the king himself, a devastating blow to any noble's prestige. So, were Louis's liaisons romantic dalliances? Well, They were certainly more chess match than love story, each move calculated for maximum political gain. They were as much about consolidating power as they were about personal pleasure, reflecting the intricate dance of politics and passion that characterized his reign. As we wrap up this chapter on Louis Roman XIV, remember that Versailles was more than a palace. It was a symbol of absolute power. The Sun King's court was a microcosm of the political machinations that defined his era. In the opulence of Versailles, we see the shining allure of power, but also the shadows it casts. And as we navigate these historical corridors, remember that every gilded room and whispered secret reflects a deeper truth about the human condition, our eternal dance with power, love, and ambition. But don't pack up your history books just yet. We've got more royal scandals, power plays, and historical intrigue to uncover. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll delve further into the world of European royalty and their tumultuous, and sometimes downright bizarre, love lives. Keep those powdered wigs at the ready. We're just getting started. And speaking of tumultuous love lives and political maneuvering, let's set our sights on the frosty expanse of Russia, where the Romanovs ruled with a blend of opulence and iron will. If you think the Sun King played a dazzling Game of Thrones, wait until you meet Catherine the Great. Her reign was a theatrical mix of enlightenment and scandal, seasoned with enough myth-making to put Hollywood biopics to shame. Catherine was born Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst-Dornberg, a mouthful of a name for a Prussian princess with an eye on the Russian throne. She was shipped off to Russia at the tender age of 16 to marry the future Tsar, Peter Roman III, a man rumored to be more interested in toy soldiers than his real army, or his wife, for that matter. Their marriage was, predictably, a disaster, marked more by political machinations than marital bliss. In the grand tradition of royal unions, theirs was a strategic alliance with all the warmth of a Siberian winter. Now, let's tackle some of the juicier myths that have swirled around Catherine like a snowstorm. Perhaps the most infamous rumor was that Catherine's amorous escapades extended beyond human partners to include an equine lover, a tale as baseless as it is bizarre. This myth likely sprang from the fertile imaginations of her detractors, eager to undermine her authority with scandalous gossip. In reality, Catherine was a shrewd ruler who understood the power of perception and the dangers of a salacious rumor. Catherine's real love life, while less tabloid-worthy, was still quite the saga. She had a series of high-profile lovers, including Grigory Orlov, who played a key role in the coup that brought her to power in 1762. Orlov and his 4 brothers were instrumental in deposing Peter Roman III, who, in a twist of royal irony, was assassinated shortly after being forced to abdicate. Catherine, now the Empress of Russia, rewarded Orlov with titles and wealth, further cementing her rule. But this wasn't just a case of passion. It was politics at its sharpest. Catherine needed allies as much as she needed love, and Orlov provided both. Catherine's reign wasn't just about romantic intrigue. It was a masterclass in statecraft. She expanded the Russian Empire by some 200,000 square miles, adding Crimea, parts of Poland, and Alaska to her dominion. Her foreign policy was a kaleidoscope of alliances, wars, and treaties, all orchestrated with the precision of a chess grandmaster, navigated the choppy waters of European diplomacy with a keen sense of realpolitik, ensuring that Russia emerged as a major player on the world stage. Economically, Catherine's era was transformative. She worked to modernize Russia's agricultural sector, introducing new crops like the potato, which, despite initial resistance, potatoes were once considered unfit for human consumption, became a staple of the Russian diet. She also promoted trade, industry, and education, establishing the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens in 1764, the first state-financed higher education institution for women in Europe. Talk about shattering the glass ceiling with a scepter. Yet, for all her accomplishments, Catherine's reign wasn't devoid of challenges. The serfs, the backbone of Russia's agrarian economy, remained in a state of near-feudal bondage. While Catherine considered reform, she ultimately prioritized the support of the nobility, who were none too pleased with the idea of freeing their labor force. So, despite her enlightened policies, Catherine's reign left the serfs in chains, a decision that would have long-term repercussions for Russian society. And let's not forget the Pugachev Rebellion of 1773, a massive peasant uprising led by Yemelyan Pugachev, who claimed to be Peter Roman III resurrected. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, but it exposed the simmering discontent among the peasantry and highlighted the underlying tensions in Catherine's Russia. It was a stark reminder that beneath the empire's gilded surface lay a seething unrest that could not be ignored. Catherine's liaisons, meanwhile, continued to be a blend of the personal and political. After Orlov, Grigory Potemkin became her most significant companion. Potemkin was not only her lover, but also a formidable statesman. Together, they envisioned the expansion of the Russian Empire into the Black Sea region, founding cities and establishing naval bases. Their relationship was as much a partnership of power as it was of passion, a testament to Catherine's ability to intertwine her personal desires with her imperial ambitions. While Catherine's personal life was the stuff of legend, her legacy is far more substantive. She laid the groundwork for Russia's transformation into a cultural and intellectual powerhouse, inviting European philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot to her court and promoting the arts and sciences. Under her reign, the Hermitage Museum was founded, and the Russian Enlightenment flourished, turning St. Petersburg into a beacon of culture and learning. Yet, despite her enlightened despotism, Catherine's reign left some problems unresolved, problems that would eventually boil over into revolution. Her balancing act between reform and autocracy set the stage for future strife, underscoring the complexities of ruling a vast and diverse empire. So, as we leave the Russian court bathed in the glow of Catherine's extraordinary reign, let's remember that her story is more than just scandal and grandeur. It's a tale of ambition, strategy, and the enduring clash between tradition and progress. Catherine the Great was not just a ruler, she was an architect of empire, a woman who wielded power with a deft touch that few monarchs could match. But hold on to your Ashankas, because the European royal saga is far from over. Next, we'll journey back to the heart of the continent, where the Habsburgs were busy building a legacy of their own, a tale marked by dynastic marriages, strategic alliances, and the occasional bout of Habsburg chin. Stay tuned for more historical intrigue as we continue to unravel the fascinating tapestry of royal Europe. And just like that, we pivot from the grand stage of Catherine the Great's Russia to the intricate web of Habsburg Europe, where family reunions were less about awkward chit-chat and more about strategic empire building. The Habsburgs, famously, had a knack for turning weddings into treaties and cousins into spouses, an approach to governance that makes one wonder if their family motto should have been "Why outsource when you can insource?" Now, when it comes to royal intermarriage, the Habsburgs were the undisputed champions. Their family tree is less a tree and more a shrub, with branches looping back onto themselves in a tangled mess of alliances, and yes, genetic complications. Habsburg jaw, or mandibular prognathism to the scientifically inclined, became the unfortunate emblem of their matrimonial strategy. This distinctive feature was the result of generations of intermarriage, a genetic quirk that gave many Habsburgs a rather prominent chin and a serious dental challenge. But let's not just chalk this up to a series of unfortunate events. The Habsburgs had a plan, albeit one that might have benefited from a bit of genetic counseling. In an era where power was often measured in acres and alliances, marrying within the family was a surefire way to keep the land and power consolidated. Why risk diluting your empire by marrying outsiders when you could keep everything in the family? It's like the royal version of a loyalty program, albeit with a few more unintended side effects. Take Charles Roman II of Spain, for example, the poster child for the genetic consequences of Habsburg intermarriage. Born in 1661, Charles was the product of generations of familial unions, and he paid the price. Known as El Hechizado, or the Bewitched, Charles suffered from a host of health issues, from physical deformities to intellectual disabilities. His tongue was so large that he had difficulty speaking, and he was unable to chew his food properly, traits that didn't exactly scream robust monarch. Yet for all the personal tragedies, the Habsburgs were playing a high-stakes game of political chess. By the 16th century, their dominions stretched across Europe, from the Spanish Empire to the Holy Roman Empire. And how did they achieve such dominance? Through an intricate dance of strategic marriages, each one designed to strengthen their grip on power. The infamous marriage of Ferdinand Roman II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile in 1469, for example, laid the groundwork for the unification of Spain and the launch of the Spanish Inquisition. Talk about a marriage with consequences. But let's not sugarcoat it. These alliances were as much a gamble as they were a strategy. The Habsburgs were betting on stability through unity, but the genetic roulette they were playing could, and did, backfire spectacularly. As the saying goes, let others wage war, you happy Austria marry. It's a catchy slogan, but one that glosses over the less than glamorous outcomes of such a policy. By the time of Charles Roman II, the Habsburg line was teetering on the brink of collapse. His death in 1700, childless and with no clear heir, plunged Spain into the War of Spanish Succession, a conflict that reshaped the European balance of power and signaled the end of Habsburg rule in Spain. The irony, the very strategy that had built their empire, keeping it all in the family, became their undoing. Economically, the Habsburg strategy was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, marrying within the family helped consolidate wealth and land, creating vast empires that could rival any in Europe. But the costs were steep. Wars to defend or expand these territories drained the coffers, while the centralized power structure often led to inefficiencies and corruption. The Spanish Armada, for instance, launched in 1588 to invade England, was a financial disaster, costing Spain an estimated 10 million ducats, a staggering sum equivalent to billions today. So why did they persist? Well, in the chessboard of European politics, the Habsburgs were playing the long game. Their matrimonial maneuvers were about more than just immediate gains. They were about ensuring the dynasty's long-term survival. But as history shows, sometimes the best-laid plans of emperors and archdukes go awry. And let's not forget the social backdrop against which this all played out. Europe in the Habsburg era was a patchwork of shifting alliances and rivalries, where marriages were as much about survival as they were about love. The stakes were high, and the players were ruthless, because in the Game of Thrones, you either win or you end up with a jawline that could cut glass. As we dig deeper into the Habsburg saga, remember that the story of their intermarriage is not just one of genetic misfortune, but of political ambition and the relentless pursuit of power. It's a tale that reminds us of the precarious balance between personal desires and imperial duties, and how the pursuit of one can often lead to the downfall of the other. So as we leave this chapter of Habsburg history with more questions than answers, let's remember that, in the world of royal politics, the line between strategy and folly is often as thin as a Habsburg chin. And while their legacy may be tinged with tragedy, their story is a testament to the enduring complexity of power, family, and the human condition. But don't put away your historical maps just yet. We've still got more royal intrigue and dynastic drama to uncover. Stay tuned as we continue our journey through the annals of European royalty, where the stakes are high, the plots are thick, and the lessons are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The next chapter promises even more twists and turns, so keep those powdered wigs and family trees handy. We're far from the final act. As we untangle the royal web spun by the Habsburgs, it's time to confront the curious question. What did all this dynastic drama really leave behind? Sure, they gave us a genetic anomaly that doubled as a family crest, but the real legacy runs deeper than bone structure and royal scandals. These personal choices, however eyebrow-raising, wielded remarkable influence over the political landscape of Europe, shaping entire nations with the flick of a matrimonial pen. Take a moment to ponder the fact that while modern folks swipe right for love, the royals of yesteryear were playing Tinder with entire empires. The choice of a spouse could mean the difference between peace and war, prosperity and poverty. Charles Roman II of Spain, for instance, was less about ruling and more about being ruled by the complexities of his heritage. His inability to produce an heir, thanks to a gene pool that was more puddle than pond, led to the War of Spanish Succession. This wasn't just a family crisis. It was a seismic shift in European power dynamics. The Habsburgs, in their relentless pursuit of keeping it all in the family, inadvertently laid the groundwork for modern Europe. Their union stitched together a patchwork quilt of territories that would eventually unravel into nation-states. By the time the War of Spanish Succession wrapped up in 1714, the Treaty of Utrecht had redrawn the map of Europe, redistributing Habsburg lands and setting the stage for future conflicts. It was a reminder that the personal is often political, sometimes explosively so. But let's not just pin it all on the Habsburgs. Across the continent, royal marriages were the original Game of Thrones. Over in England, Henry Roman VIII marital antics, as we've seen, didn't just shake up the bedroom, but also the church pews, triggering a religious revolution and a complete overhaul of English society. His desperate quest for a male heir turned personal heartbreak into national upheaval, and it's a reminder that in the halls of power, love and politics are often indistinguishable bedfellows. Meanwhile, in France, Louis Roman XIV court at Versailles was less about secret trysts and more about political theatre. His liaisons were strategic maneuvers, each affair a calculated step in the dance of power. Madame de Montespan wasn't just a mistress. She was a political ally, helping to keep the nobility in line while the sun King shone ever brighter. The fact that Versailles became synonymous with opulence and excess is no accident. Louis used his personal life as a tool of statecraft, dazzling the nobility into submission with a display of wealth and wit that kept their ambitions in check. Catherine the Great, too, turned personal relationships into political capital. Her lovers were more than romantic interests. They were partners in her imperial ambitions. Grigory Potemkin, for instance, wasn't just a companion. He was a co-conspirator in expanding Russia's borders, a testament to Catherine's ability to blend personal desires with political strategy. Her reign was a balancing act between enlightenment and autocracy, and her personal choices were woven into the very fabric of her empire. All these tales of royal love lives might sound like a medieval soap opera, but they were anything but trivial. These intimate dramas were the engines of history, propelling nations into the future whether they liked it or not. The consequences of these unions, particularly the genetic dead ends of the Habsburgs or the religious schisms of Henry Roman VIII, were not just royal headaches, but societal migraines that reshaped the political and cultural landscapes of Europe. Yet, in retrospect, there's a certain romance to these stories that's hard to resist. After all, who doesn't love a good scandal or a tale of forbidden love? The allure of secret passageways and whispered corridors, of kings and queens maneuvering through life's chessboard with a wink and a nod, is irresistible. We tend to gloss over the messier realities, the economic strains, the political fallout, the human cost, in favor of a narrative that paints these figures as grand and glamorous. But here's the kicker. These romanticized tales often obscure the grittier truths. Behind the grandeur lurked economic collapse, social unrest, and political chaos. The lavish balls of Versailles were funded by the sweat and toil of the peasantry, while the Habsburgs' genetic gambles resulted in dynastic collapse. And while Catherine's enlightened reign is celebrated, the serfs remained shackled, their plight a dark shadow on her legacy. So, as we draw the curtain on our exploration of royal romance and its historical repercussions, let's remember that these stories are more than just tantalizing tidbits from the past. They are reflections of the human condition, reminders of the power of personal choices to shape the course of history. The royals of Europe, for all their flaws and foibles, were players in a grand narrative of ambition and power, love and legacy. And while their stories may be gilded with glamour, they are rooted in the harsh realities of a world where the personal was inextricably linked to the political. As we bid adieu to these bygone royals, let's carry their lessons with us, a mix of cautionary tales and enduring legacies. Because whether you're a monarch or a commoner, history has a way of reminding us that every choice, no matter how personal, can have profound consequences. And in the end, perhaps that's the most romantic and realistic story of all. In the mid-19th century, Japan was like your grandparent who still stubbornly used a rotary phone while the rest of the world was Snapchatting. Born in 1852, young Matsuhito, later known as Emperor Meiji, entered this scene like the awkward teenager at a party where everyone else was already well into their cups. The country was still snugly wedged into the Edo period, a time marked by samurai swagger and strict social codes, but also by a certain xenophobic charm that told foreign ships to back the heck off. Matsuhito was the son of Emperor Komai, but let's not kid ourselves. Real power at the time was wielded by the Tokugawa shogunate. The emperor was more of a spiritual figurehead, like a mascot with a really nice robe. The shogunate, on the other hand, was calling the shots, and by shots, we mean maintaining Japan's self-imposed isolation, while Europe was busy divvying up the world like a Thanksgiving pie. As a kid, Matsuhiro was drenched in samurai traditions. Picture this, a world where your life lessons involve bushido, tea ceremonies, and the delicate art of not losing your head, literally. And speaking of heads, his own was filled with the Confucian classics. This wasn't your average bedtime reading. It was more like a convoluted manual on ancient ethics and governance. But don't let the romanticized notions of samurai honor fool you. Life in samurai Japan was less about gallant duels under cherry blossoms, and more about maintaining a feudal status quo that kept the warlords fat and happy. The young prince's world was rocked by political unrest as the Tokugawa shogunate's grip started slipping faster than a buttered eel. By the 1850, the Western world had come knocking, hard, on Japan's door. Commodore Matthew Perry showed up in 1853 with a fleet of black ships and a demand wrapped in gunboat diplomacy, open up for trade or else. The problem was, Perry's fleet looked less like a friendly invitation and more like a pirate invasion, which, coincidentally, was also how Japan saw it. Matsuhiro was just a toddler when Perry's flotilla showed up, but the ripple effects were unavoidable. The shogunate, after much hemming and hawing, opened a few ports and signed treaties that were about as fair as a rigged carnival game. This sparked internal chaos, with the nationalists shouting for the shogunate's head, and the shogunate trying desperately to hold onto its waning power. The political climate was like a pressure cooker ready to blow its lid, and young Matsuhiro was the little bean being boiled alive in it. Fast forward to 1867, and the stage was set for a dramatic overthrow. Matsuhiro was only 15 when he suddenly found himself thrust into the limelight as Emperor Meiji. Talk about a baptism by fire. He was expected to wrangle a nation in the throes of teenage rebellion against its feudal upbringing. The Tokugawa shogunate was on its last legs, and everyone knew it except, perhaps, the shogunate itself. The Barshin War of 1868-69 saw imperial forces clash with the shogun's army, and spoiler alert, the emperor's side won. This was less a testament to Meiji's early leadership, and more due to the shogunate's spectacular implosion. So there was Meiji, a kid barely out of his teens, sitting on the chrysanthemum throne with a country that was eyeing the modern world like a cat staring at a cucumber. His task, drag Japan kicking and screaming into the industrial age. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the daunting technological gap. When Meiji became emperor, Japan was a nation where a telegraph was about as believable as a message sent by carrier pigeon trained by David Copperfield. But here's the kicker. Meiji wasn't just a figurehead. He was determined to transform Japan. And he wasn't alone. Influential leaders and advisors around him were ready to ditch the old ways like a bad habit. The emperor and his crew had a vision, to create a modern state that could stand toe-to-toe with the Western powers instead of being trampled underfoot. It was like trying to turn a horse-drawn carriage into a bullet train overnight. The first step was to centralize power and dismantle the feudal domains. This wasn't a simple task of sending out a few strongly worded memos. It was a massive, sweeping overhaul that involved scrapping centuries-old systems and dealing with disgruntled samurai who weren't thrilled about losing their cushy status. In 1871, the government abolished the hand system, replacing it with a more centralized prefecture system. The samurai class was essentially told, "Thanks for your service, but we're fresh out of wars for you to fight." Meiji and his government embarked on a whirlwind tour of modernization, importing Western technology and systems like they were the latest fashion trends. Railways were laid down, telegraphs strung up, and in 1872, the first railway line between Tokyo and Yokohama was opened, covering a whopping 29 kilometers. It was a small step for railroads, but a giant leap for Japan. But modernization wasn't just about steel and steam, it was also about mindsets. Meiji himself embodied this change. He ditched the traditional court garb for Western-style military uniforms, a symbolic gesture that turned heads and raised eyebrows. It was as if he was saying, "Look, if I'm going to lead a modern nation, I might as well look the part." His court followed suit, adopting Western attire and customs in a cultural transformation that was as much about optics as it was substance. Amidst all these changes, Meiji kept his eye on the prize, making Japan a player on the world stage. He wasn't just modernizing for modernization's sake. He was building a nation that could compete. The goal was clear: avoid becoming another colonial footnote in the annals of history. Instead, Japan would write its own chapter, and Meiji was determined to make sure it was a bestseller. As we pause this tale at the dawn of Meiji's reign as emperor, remember that his rise was anything but a smooth, preordained path. It was the result of tumultuous times, strategic alliances, and a bit of luck. And while the road ahead was fraught with challenges, Meiji and his cohorts were ready to tackle them with the tenacity of a samurai, wielding a katana in one hand and a telegraph key in the other. Stay tuned, because the story of how Japan transformed from an isolated archipelago into a global powerhouse is just warming up. With Meiji at the helm, Japan was about to speed through a transformation so radical it would make a caterpillar a butterfly look like a minor wardrobe change. The Meiji Restoration was more than just a political coup. It was a societal reboot on a scale that would give even the most ambitious New Year's resolution a run for its money. At the heart of this transformation was the Charter Oath of 1868, a document that read like a manifesto for a new dawn, penned with the sweeping optimism of a nation ready to trade its feudal chains for a place at the global table. The Charter Oath was Japan's five-point plan to emerge from the shadow of the Edo period and into the spotlight of modernity. It was like the first draft of a national self-help book, aiming to make Japan less of a hermit kingdom and more of a cosmopolitan powerhouse. The first point called for the establishment of deliberative assemblies, which translated to let's actually talk about stuff before making decisions. Novel, right? It was essentially Japan's way of saying, hey, maybe we should try this whole democracy thing. Next on the agenda was a promise that all classes, high and low, would unite in carrying out the affairs of state. This was a big deal, considering Japan's social hierarchy was stricter than a Victorian schoolmarm. The third point was a call to abandon evil customs of the past, a phrase that sounds vague, but was as loaded as a samurai's arsenal. The fourth clause advocated for knowledge to be sought throughout the world, a nod to Western learning that was like telling everyone to pack their bags for a world tour of ideas. The fifth and final point was the piece de resistance, the pledge to keep pace with the times. It was the equivalent of Japan pledging to hit refresh on its browser, ditching the outdated feudal tab for something more 19th century. This wasn't just a wish list. It was a blueprint for a new Japan, one that was ready to swap its isolationist past for a future on the global stage. Now, let's talk Westernization. If the Charter Oath was Japan's mission statement, Westernization was the strategy. It came with the enthusiasm of a teenager discovering TikTok. Every new gadget and idea was the next big thing. Meiji and his advisors were like kids in a candy store, picking and choosing from the West's greatest hits: railroads, postal systems, telegraphs, and education reforms. It was an era where anything seemed possible, and the only limit was the imagination or the budget. Westernization wasn't just about shiny new tech. It was also about reshaping society. Education was overhauled to include Western science and mathematics, making Japanese classrooms less about rote memorization and more about critical thinking. The Imperial University, established in 1877, became a beacon of knowledge, drawing scholars from across the globe. It was a far cry from the Confucian classics young Meiji had been steeped in, but it was the intellectual fuel Japan needed to power its modern engines. But let's not pretend this transition was as smooth as a silk kimono. There were growing pains, and plenty of them. The push for Westernization ignited debates that were fierier than a sumo wrestling match. Traditionalists balked at the rapid changes, fearing that Japan was losing its identity in a whirlwind of foreign influence. This tension between old and new was like a cultural tug-of-war, with each side pulling hard on the rope of national identity. And then there was the economy, which needed more than a little TLC to keep up with the modern makeover. The Meiji government knew they had to bolster Japan's industrial base to compete internationally, so they embarked on what could only be described as the greatest startup venture of the 19th century. Factories sprouted up faster than cherry blossoms in spring, producing textiles, steel, and ships, the lifeblood of a modern nation. Yet the economic shift wasn't just about building things. It was about building a workforce. The government encouraged the development of zaibatsu, large industrial conglomerates that would become the backbone of Japan's economic might. These were family-run enterprises that had the muscle to drive Japan's industrial growth, and they were about as close to corporate royalty as you could get. This industrial boom came with its own set of challenges. Urbanization led to overcrowded cities, with workers living in conditions that made a sardine can look spacious. Labor rights were virtually non-existent, and the gap between the rich and poor widened to a chasm. Yet, in the spirit of the era, these issues were seen as growing pains, a necessary evil on the road to progress. If Meiji was the face of this transformation, the real work was done by the men behind the scenes, the oligarchs and reformers who pushed the agenda forward. Figures like Ito Hirobumi, who studied in Europe and returned with ideas that would shape Japan's constitution, and Okubo Toshimichi, who played a pivotal role in the abolition of the feudal system. These men were the architects of modern Japan, orchestrating the changes that would make the nation a force to be reckoned with. Yet, even as Japan embraced the future, it couldn't escape its past. The samurai, once the ruling class, found themselves obsolete in a world where swords were no match for rifles. The government offered a pittance in exchange for their swords, a symbolic trade that underscored the shifting power dynamics. Many samurai were left to find new roles in this modern world, often taking up positions in the military or as bureaucrats. As Japan hurtled towards the future, it kept one eye on its neighbors. The international landscape was a game of chess, and Japan was determined to play it well. Imperial ambitions simmered beneath the surface as the nation sought to expand its influence in Asia. The seeds of future conflicts were being sown, even as the country focused on building itself from within. Amidst all this change, Emperor Meiji remained a symbol of continuity. He was the thread that tied the old Japan to the new, a living reminder of the nation's heritage, even as it embraced the new world. His role was mostly ceremonial, yet his presence was a stabilizing force in a time of upheaval. The emperor was the face of Japan's aspirations, a constant figure in an era of constant change. As the 19th century drew to a close, Japan stood at the cusp of a new era. The Meiji Restoration had set the stage for the nation's emergence as a global power, but the journey was far from over. The challenges were many, and the stakes were high. But for Meiji and his nation, the path was clear, forward into the future, with the lessons of the past lighting the way. Stay with us as we explore how Japan continued its climb to prominence, navigating the stormy seas of geopolitics and industrial ambition. With Japan straddling the threshold of a new era, it was time to take stock of the economic and social reforms that shook the archipelago like a sumo wrestler on a trampoline. The Meiji Restoration wasn't just a political revolution. It was a full-throttle societal shake-up that left no stone or samurai unturned. First up, the samurai class. Picture this: thousands of warriors, once the toast of the town, suddenly finding themselves as useful as a sword in a gunfight. The government, always on the lookout for a cost-effective solution, decided to phase out the samurai stipends, leaving many of these sword-wielding elites scrambling for relevance. In the grand scheme of things, the samurai were a relic of the past, a bit like insisting on writing checks in a world of digital payments. The old guard was given a choice: trade in their swords for government bonds, or find a new gig. Some took up roles in the burgeoning military or civil service, while others clung to their katana like a security blanket. The abolition of the samurai class was as smooth as sandpaper, with revolts like the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 proving that discontent was alive and kicking. This rebellion, led by the last samurai Seigo Takamori, was a dramatic last stand against modernization. It ended in a blaze of glory and gunfire, cementing Seigo's status as a tragic hero in Japanese lore. It was like the Wild West with a distinctly Eastern flavor, complete with cavalry charges and a noble, albeit doomed, resistance. Meanwhile, in the world of commerce, Japan was spinning a new tale, literally. Enter the silkworms, the unsung heroes of Japan's economic miracle. Silk became Japan's ticket to the big leagues. with exports skyrocketing like a rocket-powered kite. By the 1880, silk accounted for over 40% of Japan's exports, making these tiny creatures the unlikely champions of the nation's balance of trade. It was a silk road to prosperity, with Japan weaving its way into the fabric of global commerce. This silk boom wasn't just about fashion, it was an economic lifeline. The industrial sector got a shot in the arm, fueling a surge in factory jobs and technological investment. The government, riding the wave of silk-induced euphoria, invested in infrastructure like a teenager with a new credit card. Railways expanded, ports buzzed with activity, and factories hummed with the energy of a nation on the move. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The rapid industrialization of Japan was like trying to ride a bicycle with square wheels, bumpy and full of surprises. Urban areas swelled with workers looking for jobs, leading to overcrowding and living conditions that made a sardine can look positively palatial. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was progress. The government pushed through reforms to improve worker conditions and public health, though these were often more aspirational than actual, like promising to do your taxes on time. Education was another area where Meiji's policies were both brilliant and occasionally hilariously chaotic. In 1872, the government introduced compulsory education, a radical move that aimed to create a literate and skilled populace. The idea was simple: train young minds to fuel the national engine. Schools popped up across the country like mushrooms after rain, and by 1900, the literacy rate had soared to over 90%. It was a heady mix of Western science and traditional values, a curriculum designed to mold the future leaders of a modern Japan. But implementing compulsory education was akin to herding cats. Many rural families balked at the idea of sending their children to school when they could be helping out in the fields. The government, however, was relentless, pushing forward with a determination that would have made a bulldozer look indecisive. The result: a new generation of Japanese citizens armed with knowledge and ready to take on the world. The social reforms didn't stop at education. Meiji government was on a mission to redesign the social fabric of Japan, and it wasn't afraid to take bold steps. The class system, once rigid and unyielding, began to melt away like snow in the rising sun of modernity. Meiji's mantra seemed to be equality, or at least a version of it that fit the era's sensibilities. It was an ambitious goal, and while the execution was sometimes as clumsy as a giraffe on roller skates, the intent was clear. Women's rights, however, were still in the slow lane of progress. While the rest of society was hurtling towards modernity, women were often left watching from the sidelines. The government made tentative steps, like allowing women to attend school, but their role remained largely domestic. It was a work in progress, with change coming at a glacial pace. Yet, seeds were being planted for future generations to cultivate. As Japan's social and economic landscape transformed, the international stage loomed ever larger. The country was no longer content to sit on the sidelines. It wanted a piece of the action. The Meiji government knew that to be taken seriously, Japan needed to flex its military muscles. So, they embarked on a military modernization program that was as ambitious as it was expensive. The new Imperial Japanese Army was modeled after the Prussian military, while the Navy took cues from the British Royal Navy. It was a strategic makeover that turned Japan from a feudal backwater into a formidable force. By the 1890, Japan's military was ready to test its mettle, and the Sino-Japanese War of 1894-95 provided the perfect opportunity. Spoiler alert: Japan emerged victorious, cementing its status as a rising power in Asia. So there we have it, a nation transformed, with Emperor Meiji at the helm guiding Japan through the choppy waters of change. His reign was a whirlwind of reforms, progress, and occasionally chaos. Yet through it all, Japan emerged stronger, more unified, and ready to take its place on the world stage. As we pause this tale, remember that the journey is far from over. The story of Japan's transformation is a tapestry of triumphs and trials, woven together with the threads of history. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel this epic saga of a nation on the rise. And with Japan flexing its newly formed military muscles like a bodybuilder on protein shakes, the stage was set for a showdown that would showcase its transformation into a bona fide power player. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894-95 was almost a coming-out party for Japan, a chance to strut its stuff on the world stage. The conflict with China over influence in Korea was a test of Japan's revamped military might, and spoiler alert, the results were less David versus Goliath, and more David wins with a knockout punch. The war itself was a whirlwind affair, lasting just under a year, but in that short time, Japan's military prowess was on full display. The Imperial Japanese Army, fresh from its Prussian-inspired makeover, moved with precision and efficiency, while the Navy, armed with ships and tactics borrowed from the British, proved its mettle in the Battle of the Yalu River. Japan's victory was like a bolt from the blue, sharking Western powers, who had assumed that an Asian nation's military was about as formidable as a paper tiger in a monsoon. Let's put some numbers to this victory. The Treaty of Shimonoseki, which concluded the war in April 1895, saw Japan acquire Taiwan, the Pescadores Islands, and a hefty indemnity of 200 million taels of silver. That's roughly equivalent to $150 million at the time, or as we'd say today, a boatload of cash. This windfall not only filled Japan's coffers, but also funded further military expansion, a move that would soon have the nation eyeing the Russian bear with more than a little ambition. But let's not romanticize this victory without acknowledging the harsh realities. The war left Korea in a precarious position, caught between two powers with competing interests. While Japan might have been the victor, the Korean peninsula was the real loser, its fate tossed around like a political football. The romantic notion of Japan as a liberator was overshadowed by its imperial ambitions that would soon lead to further entanglements. With its newfound status, Japan set its sights on Russia, a country that was as vast as it was unwieldy. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904-05 became the next proving ground for Japan's military machine. The conflict was a classic case of David versus Goliath. But this time, David had a modern arsenal and a strategic acumen that made the Russian military look like it was stuck in the 19th century. The war kicked off with a surprise attack on Port Arthur, a Russian naval base in Manchuria. It was a tactical masterstroke that caught the Russians off guard, proving that Japan had learned the art of warfare as well as any Western power. The naval battle of Tsushima in May 1905 was the piece de resistance, a crushing defeat for the Russian fleet that sent shockwaves across the globe. Japan's navy had become the Marie Kondo of the seas, tidying up colonial ambitions with ruthless efficiency. In the aftermath, the Treaty of Portsmouth, brokered by none other than U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, saw Russia recognize Japan's dominance in Korea and cede control of Port Arthur and the southern half of Sakhalin Island. It was a diplomatic coup that cemented Japan's status as a world power and left Russia licking its wounds. The treaty marked the first time an Asian power had defeated a European one in modern warfare, an achievement that resonated far beyond the battlefields of Asia. Economically, these victories had seismic implications. The war efforts had strained Japan's resources, but the indemnities and territorial gains helped offset the costs. Japan's economy, already turbocharged by industrialization, found new avenues for growth in its expanded territories. Manchuria, in particular, became a resource-rich prize, offering coal and iron to fuel Japan's industrial ambitions. Yet, with great power came great responsibility, or in Japan's case, a burgeoning imperial ego. The victories in China and against Russia fueled a growing nationalism that was as intoxicating as it was dangerous. The nation had tasted the fruits of empire, and like a kid in a candy store, it wanted more. The romantic notion of a rising sun shining over Asia appealed to many, but the reality was far more complex, a tangled web of geopolitics and colonial ambitions that would eventually lead to darker chapters in history. In the midst of all this, Emperor Meiji sat at the helm, a figurehead in many ways, but also a symbol of Japan's newfound place in the world. His reign was the thread that connected the old Japan with the new, a constant presence as the nation navigated the choppy waters of international politics. Meiji himself was a master of optics, understanding the power of symbolism and the importance of presenting a unified front to the world. Behind the scenes, though, the real work was being done by Japan's oligarchs and military leaders. Figures like Admiral Togo Hihikairo, hailed as a hero for his role in the Russo-Japanese War, became household names, their exploits celebrated in song and story. The military had become the backbone of Japan's rise, but it was a double-edged sword, one that could just as easily cut the nation as it could defend it. As the dust settled from its military triumphs, Japan found itself at a crossroads. The nation was now a recognized power, but with that recognition came new challenges and responsibilities. The international community was watching closely, and Japan's next moves would be scrutinized with a level of attention that it had never before experienced. The question was, where would Japan go from here? The nation had proven its mettle on the battlefield, but the future was uncertain. The romantic vision of a martyr, Imperial Japan, was appealing, but the realities of maintaining such a status were daunting. It was a delicate balancing act, one that would require careful navigation in the years to come. As we pause this tale, remember that Japan's journey was far from over. The story of its rise to power is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, conflict, and transformation. Stay tuned as we continue to explore how Japan's newfound status shaped its destiny and the world around it. The saga of Emperor Meiji and his nation is one that continues to resonate, offering lessons and insights that remain relevant to this day. As Japan sailed forward with its newfound status, the world held its breath to see how this rising sun would set its course. Emperor Meiji, the man behind the curtain, was about to bow out, leaving the stage set for the next act in Japan's unfolding drama. His death in 1912 was not just the end of a life, but the closing chapter of an era that had transformed Japan from a sequestered island nation into a formidable global player. Meiji's passing was like the final stroke in a masterful painting, sudden, yet leaving a legacy that would be analyzed, debated, and romanticized for generations. During his reign, Japan had gone from a nation of sword-wielding samurai to one that could hold its own against the great powers of the West. It was as if Japan had jumped from Shakespearean drama to modern theater without missing a cue. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The myth of Emperor Meiji as the singular visionary guiding Japan through the choppy waters of modernization is as simplistic as a haiku. In reality, the emperor was more of a steady hand on the tiller than a one-man powerhouse. The true driving force behind Japan's rapid transformation was a cadre of reformers, oligarchs, and military leaders, the shadowy cabal that modernized Japan while Meiji wore the crown. In many ways, Meiji was Japan's first influencer. Long before Instagram was a glimmer in a coder's eye. He was the face of a movement, the living symbol of a nation reinventing itself. The image of Meiji in Western military attire, for instance, was as calculated as any modern PR campaign. It signaled to the world, and to Japan itself, that the nation was serious about its new direction. Meiji's reign, in this sense, was a masterclass in optics, a 19th century lesson in how to brand a nation. Yet, beneath this polished exterior lay the gritty realities of Japan's transformation. The Meiji era was a time of breakneck change, and not everyone was thrilled to be on the roller coaster. The abolition of the samurai class, while necessary, left many disenfranchised. It's romantic to imagine noble warriors laying down their swords for the good of the nation, but the truth was more complex. Many former samurai felt adrift, their world turned upside down by a government that was more interested in industrial output than honor. Economically, Japan had catapulted itself from agrarian economy to industrial dynamo faster than you can say zaibatsu. By 1912, Japan's GDP had grown approximately fivefold since the start of Meiji's reign. This was the industrial equivalent of a Cinderella story, but instead of a fairy godmother, Japan had state-sponsored conglomerates driving growth. The rise of these zaibatsu, like Mitsubishi and Sumitomo, was a double-edged sword. While they fueled economic expansion, they also concentrated wealth and power in the hands of a few families, creating a socio-economic landscape as uneven as Tokyo's hilly streets. And then there was the military, the real muscle behind Japan's newfound swagger. The victories over China and Russia had cemented Japan's status as a regional power, but they also sowed the seeds of future conflict. The militarization of Japan was akin to handing a teenager the keys to a sports car, thrilling but fraught with potential for disaster. The romantic notion of Japan as a benevolent power was undermined by its expanding imperial ambitions, a reality that would soon come to a head in the tumultuous decades to follow. Meiji's legacy, then, is a study in contrasts. On one hand, he is celebrated as the architect of modern Japan, a ruler who presided over an era of unprecedented change. On the other, he was a figurehead in a system driven by others, a symbol rather than the source of Japan's transformation. The truth lies somewhere in between, a complex tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, innovation, and the relentless march of progress. In the end, Meiji left Japan a nation unrecognizable from the one he inherited. The country that was once a secluded hermit had emerged as a confident young power, ready to play in the big leagues. But this transformation came at a cost. The rapid pace of change left deep social and economic divides, issues that would continue to challenge Japan long after Meiji's time. Yet, for all the myth-busting and reality checks, there's no denying the allure of Meiji's story. It's a tale of a nation reborn, of old ways giving way to new, and of a people who dared to imagine a different future. Meiji's reign was a turning point, a moment when Japan chose to chart its own course rather than be swept along by the tides of history. As we wrap up this journey through the life and times of Emperor Meiji, it's clear that his legacy is as complicated as it is captivating. He was more than just a ruler. He was a symbol of Japan's potential, a reminder of what can be achieved when a nation dares to dream big. His story is a testament to the power of change, the inevitability of progress, and the enduring allure of the past. So, dear listeners, as you drift off to sleep with visions of samurai, silk, and steam engines dancing in your head, remember that history is not just a collection of dates and events. It's a living, breathing narrative, full of contradictions and complexities, just like life itself. And perhaps that's what makes the story of Emperor Meiji and his Japan so endlessly fascinating. A reminder that the past is never just a prologue. It's a part of the ongoing saga of human endeavor. You wake up to the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through your domus, a subtle reminder that even in 75 AD, the day doesn't start without a proper breakfast. Forget cereal and toast. You're diving into a feast of crusty bread, olives, honey, and maybe a rich porridge if you're feeling fancy. The Romans aren't known for half measures, after all. And why should they be? You're about to spend the day engineering one of Rome's signature marvels, an aqueduct. Now, before you dive into that heap of olives, let's chew on this. The typical Roman breakfast, or intaculum, isn't just about filling your belly. It's the fuel for a day that could involve moving literal tons of stone. And let's face it, you're going to need the energy. Rome's engineers were the unsung heroes of their time, the folks who made sure the empire didn't just survive, but thrived. Without them, you'd be washing down your breakfast with stagnant swamp water, not the fresh flow from a distant mountain spring. Speaking of water, the aqueduct you're about to work on isn't just any old structure. It's a political statement wrapped in stone and mortar. The Romans built these things to scream, "Look at us! We are the masters of engineering and civilization." And scream they did, often across valleys and mountains, stretching over 300 miles in the case of the Aqua Claudia. That's nearly the distance from New York to Cleveland, in case you're wondering. As you step out into the bustling streets, the reality of it hits you. Today's project isn't just about the nuts and bolts, or rather, the stones and arches. It's about maintaining the lifeblood of the city. Aqueducts were the arteries of ancient Rome, pumping life-giving water into homes, baths, and fountains. Without them, Rome would be less of a sprawling metropolis and more of a really crowded village. And let's talk logistics. The Roman aqueducts weren't just cobbled together with a bit of optimism and some elbow grease. Oh no, these were carefully planned feats of engineering. First, you've got to find a reliable water source, preferably one that's not going to dry up every summer. Then comes the surveying. Forget your modern GPS. You're out here with a groma, a simple siding tool, and a lot of hope that your measurements are accurate. After all, a miscalculation here means your water ends up somewhere in Gaul, and that's a long way to go for a bath. Once the route is planned, it's time for construction. A typical aqueduct like the Aqua Apia, Rome's first, required thousands of laborers and tons of stone. And with the average aqueduct sloping at a subtle gradient of about 1 in 4,800, precision is key. One wrong angle, and you've turned your marvel of engineering into a giant, useless slide. But it's not just about the engineering prowess. Aqueducts were a political tool too. They were as much about asserting power as they were about providing water. Building these structures was a way for emperors to flex their muscles to say, "Look at what I've given you, my loyal subjects." Emperor Vespasian, the man of the hour in 75 AD, knew this well. He wasn't just filling Rome's fountains, he was filling his legacy. As you make your way to the construction site, the Roman roads, another engineering marvel, unfurl before you. These roads are the veins through which the empire's lifeblood flows. Trade, military might, and yes, the engineers like you. The very stones beneath your sandals are a testament to Roman ingenuity, and every step brings you closer to the towering arches and scaffolding of the aqueduct worksite. Arriving at the site, you're greeted by the organized chaos of construction. Slaves and free workers alike toil under the sun, maneuvering stone blocks that weigh as much as a small car. It's a symphony of sweat and grit, with you as the conductor. You're the mastermind here, armed with nothing more than your knowledge and a few primitive tools, yet responsible for orchestrating a project that will keep Rome quenched and clean. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is harsh. Construction isn't just backbreaking, it's dangerous. One wrong move and a block of stone could send you to meet the guards. And while you're here for the glory of Rome, let's not forget the politics back home. Aqueducts are costly, and someone's got to foot the bill. If things go south, it's not just the water that might stop flowing. Your career might take a nosedive, too. Still, despite the risks and the sweat, there's something almost exhilarating about watching the arches rise against the sky. Each stone meticulously placed is a step toward ensuring Rome's dominance. It's about more than just engineering. It's about legacy, politics, and the sheer audacity of human ambition. So, as the sun climbs higher and the shadows of the aqueduct stretch across the ground, you pause to consider the magnitude of what you're part of. This isn't just about water. It's about empire, legacy, and the vast, intricate web of decisions and actions that keep the mighty Roman machine running. All of this from a simple breakfast and the relentless drive to leave something greater for those who come next. Now, it's time to get back to work. Rome wasn't built in a day, after all. So, as you roll up your sleeves and get back to the grindstone, literally in some cases, you're reminded of the true stars of this architectural show, the arch and concrete. Oh yes, the humble arch. It's not just a pretty face, it's the backbone of Roman engineering. The arch allowed Romans to build structures that could support massive weights, laugh in the face of gravity, and declare, "Ha, we've solved the problem of spanning space." With the ability to distribute loads more evenly, arches meant fewer support columns, more open spaces, and a direct line to the guards, or at least to impressing the neighbors. But don't just take my word for it. Look at the Pont du Gard in France, a Roman aqueduct that's been standing for nearly 2,000 years. That's what I call a long-term contract with durability. It's not just surviving, it's thriving, still majestic and awe-inspiring, even as modern buildings crumble under the weight of poor design choices and budget cuts. And then there's concrete, unsung hero of Roman innovation, opus cementitium, if you want to sound like you've got a toga in your closet. This wasn't your regular garden variety concrete. The Romans whipped up a recipe that included volcanic ash, which helped it to set underwater. That's right, underwater. While other civilizations were still figuring out how to keep roofs from caving in, the Romans were busy building ports and aqueducts that defied the elements. Talk about forward thinking. The real kicker is, this wasn't some expensive luxury material. Concrete was cheap, abundant, and versatile, which is why it became the foundation, literally, of Roman building projects. It allowed for quick construction, which was crucial when you had an empire to build and a Caesar breathing down your neck for results. If there's one thing Romans didn't skimp on, it was speed and efficiency, especially when the emperor's reputation was on the line. Now, speaking of reputations, let's chat about the labor force. It's easy to get caught up in the romance of Roman ingenuity and forget who was actually doing the heavy lifting. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the toga-wearing elites. The reality is, the workforce was a mix of slaves, poor citizens, and soldiers who were often volunteered for construction duty. You know, like how your friend volunteers you to help them move on a Sunday. Slavery in ancient Rome was as brutal as it gets. These weren't just any workers. They were the cogs in the Roman machine, often living in squalid conditions, working long hours with little to no hope of freedom. Some historians estimate that about a third of the population in Rome were slaves. Imagine that, a city where every third person you passed on the street was someone who didn't choose to be there. And what about the soldiers? Well, when they weren't off conquering new lands, many found themselves building roads, fortifications, and you guessed it, aqueducts. It was a way to keep them occupied and out of trouble, but also a means of cutting costs. Why hire a bunch of masons when you've got a ready supply of disciplined, albeit disgruntled, labor? It was a win-win, if by win you mean saving cash and not caring too much about morale. On the subject of cash, let's not overlook the economics of this grand construction game. Building an aqueduct wasn't cheap. The materials alone could bankrupt a small province. Stone, lead, wood, and iron. These were the staples of Roman construction. Stone was quarried and transported, often from miles away, while lead was used for the pipes, despite the minor drawback of lead poisoning. But hey, Rome wasn't built on health-conscious decisions. And yet the costs didn't deter the Romans. If anything, they saw it as an investment. Each aqueduct was a statement of power, a demonstration of the empire's wealth, and a promise of prosperity. It was the ancient equivalent of driving a Ferrari. It showed you had the means and the moxie to back it up. The real question was whether the cost would pay off in the long run, a gamble that emperors were more than willing to make. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The grandeur of Roman engineering often overshadows the harsh realities beneath. The conditions were brutal, the hours long, and the safety measures. Well, let's just say OSHA hadn't made its debut yet. Workers faced the constant threat of injury or death, and laborers were often seen as expendable. It's the dark side of innovation, the part that doesn't get etched into marble monuments. So, as you stand amidst the dust and clamor of the construction site, you can't help but feel a mix of admiration and discomfort. The Romans were brilliant, no doubt about it, but their brilliance came at a cost. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry woven with ingenuity and imperfection, ambition and exploitation. As the sun dips toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the arches, you pause to reflect on the day's work. Tomorrow will bring more challenges, more stones to lift, and more lives to shape. But for now, you take a moment to appreciate the scale of what you're part of, both the beauty and the brutality, the genius and the grit. And with that, it's time to head back, leaving the aqueduct to bask in the glow of the setting sun. You might have just laid the foundation for another century of Roman greatness, but there's always tomorrow to tackle the next layer. After all, Rome wasn't built in a day, but it sure was built with determination and a little bit of audacity. As you head back from the site, your stomach growls like a lion in the Colosseum, reminding you it's time to tackle the next great Roman challenge. Lunch. Forget about grabbing a quick sandwich. This is a Roman-style affair. You're talking about a scene that could easily put a modern three-course meal to shame. Imagine tearing into a loaf of bread, maybe some cheese, fruits, and if your luck, or your patron's purse, holds a slab of meat. Dining in Rome wasn't just about sustenance. It was a social ritual, a chance to see and be seen, even if today your company is the dusty crew of the aqueduct construction team. But let's dig into the social strata of your lunch companions. Your team is a microcosm of Roman society itself, a layered cake of status and hierarchy. At the bottom rung, you've got the laborers, many of whom are slaves. Their lives are as tough as the stones they haul, yet they're integral to the empire's architectural ambitions. These folks are the biceps and sweat glands of the operation, and it's their tireless work that literally builds Rome. Next up, the free citizens and skilled tradesmen. They're the middle ground, the ones who've got a bit more agency, but still have to answer to the whims of those above. Some are craftsmen, others are soldiers moonlighting as masons. These guys bring the know-how to the table, wielding tools and techniques passed down like family heirlooms. At the top of the heap, you've got the overseers and engineers, the supervisors who keep this whole chaotic symphony from descending into a cacophony. They're the brains behind the operation, wielding not hammers, but the groma and corabates, ancient surveying tools that seem almost laughably simple today, but were cutting-edge tech back then. Let's pause on these tools for a moment. The groma, a wooden cross mounted on a stand, is the Roman answer to a laser level. It uses plumb lines to establish straight lines and right angles. Think of it as the Roman version of a T-square, only with more splinters. Then there's the corabates, A long wooden bench with a groove for water used to measure horizontal levels. If you're imagining a giant carpenter's level, you're on the right track. Despite their rudimentary design, these tools achieved surprising accuracy. We're talking about aqueducts with gradients as subtle as 1 in 4/800. That's the kind of precision that makes even modern engineers raise an eyebrow. All this without a computer in sight. Just brain power, ingenuity, and a knack for eyeballing it just right. It's a testament to Roman resourcefulness, a reminder that you don't always need the latest gadget to get the job done. Now, let's talk about project management, Roman style. Keeping a project on schedule and budget was just as critical then as it is in today's world of high-stakes construction. The stakes were high, not just financially, but politically. Delay the completion of an aqueduct, and you're not just holding up water delivery. You're risking the ire of an emperor who's probably already got a few assassination plots to worry about. It's the kind of pressure that would make any modern project manager break into a cold sweat. The Romans knew a thing or two about efficiency. With a workforce that could rival a small army, they had to. The logistics of feeding, housing, and organizing thousands of workers were a Herculean task in themselves. You needed a chain of command as solid as the arches you were building. It's no surprise that many Roman overseers were military men. Who else could handle the discipline and strategic planning required to keep such a project on track? And let's not forget about the budget. Rome's coffers weren't bottomless, and every project had to justify its expense. The cost of materials alone, stone, wood, lead, iron, could drain the treasury faster than a chariot race. Yet the economic payoff was undeniable. Aqueducts not only supplied the city with water, but also boosted agriculture, hygiene, and overall quality of life. They were investments in the empire's future, a way to ensure that Rome remained the beating heart of the ancient world. As you break bread with your fellow engineers, you can't help but marvel at the intricate web of social, economic, and political factors that keep this machine running. Each aqueduct isn't just a feat of engineering. It's a reflection of Roman ambition and a testament to the complex society that built it. It's a reminder that history isn't just about the grandiose and the glorious. It's about the people, their dreams, their struggles, and their indomitable spirit. So, as you finish your meal and prepare to dive back into the world of stone and sweat, you feel a renewed sense of purpose. You're not just building an aqueduct, you're contributing to the legacy of an empire. It's a heady thought, one that lingers as you return to the construction site, ready to tackle the afternoon's challenges. Because in Rome, every stone laid is a step toward immortality, testament to the audacity of human endeavor. And you, my friend, are right in the thick of it. As you return to the dust and din of the construction site, the afternoon sun beats down like an unrelenting taskmaster, a reminder that Rome's grandeur was forged in both brilliance and sweat. The aqueduct looms above you, a testament to the genius and ambition of Roman engineering. But it's more than just an architectural wonder. It's a lifeline weaving through the city's urban tapestry, bringing not only water, but also a cascade of benefits that transformed Roman life. First, let's dive into sanitation, a topic as thrilling as a gladiator match when you consider its impact on urban living. The Romans weren't just about grand baths and luxurious villas. They pioneered a level of hygiene that put them miles ahead, literally and figuratively, of their contemporaries. With aqueducts channeling fresh water into the city, public baths became more than just social hubs. They were essential to public health. You can thank these engineering marvels for reducing the spread of disease, a feat that gave Rome a leg up in longevity and vitality. And let's not forget the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's mighty sewer system. This wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was an engineering masterpiece that whisked waste out of the city with the efficiency of a modern-day flush. Aqueducts fed water into this system, ensuring a constant flow that kept the city cleaner than most of Europe would see for another millennium. Talk about a head start in urban planning. Now, when you think of Roman engineering, you might picture aqueducts arcing gracefully across the landscape like stone rainbows. But those arches did more than dazzle the eye. They were the backbone of a logistical network that supercharged trade. With new aqueducts came more reliable water supplies, and with water, agriculture flourished. Rome's hinterlands turned into a breadbasket that fed the empire, while increased trade routes ensured that the bounty of the provinces Grain from Egypt, olive oil from Hispania, spices from the east, flowed smoothly into the heart of the empire. The political maneuvering behind these projects was as intricate as the construction itself. Emperors like Vespasian, who was at the helm in 75 AD, used these monumental works as propaganda tools par excellence. Commissioning an aqueduct wasn't just about civic duty. It was a declaration of power, a way to etch their legacy in stone. Vespasian and his successors understood that providing water and infrastructure was akin to giving the city a gift of life. And let's be honest, it was also about ensuring their names were remembered long after they'd shuffled off this mortal coil. But let's not gloss over the darker side of these grand projects. The costs were astronomical. Take the Aqua Claudia. Its construction cost was rumored to be in the ballpark of 350 million sesterces. That's not small change, even for an empire with coffers as deep as the Tiber. These expenses were often covered by a combination of imperial funds, local taxes, and the occasional forced donation from wealthy citizens. Not exactly a bake sale, but effective in its own iron-fisted way. Then there's the question of sustainability. While aqueducts symbolized Rome's might and modernity, they also underscored the empire's Achilles heel, overextension. Maintaining these colossal structures required a continuous flow of resources and manpower. As the empire expanded, so did its infrastructure needs, straining the very system that had once ensured Rome's dominance. The aqueducts that once brought prosperity could become burdensome relics, especially as the empire's borders and control began to wane. Yet, here's the kicker. Despite the looming threat of decline, these projects continued. It was as though the Romans believed in their own myth of eternal greatness, convinced that their engineering prowess would somehow stave off the inevitable. It's a testament to human nature, our tendency to build bigger and bolder, sometimes ignoring the whisper of caution in the pursuit of legacy. As the shadows lengthen, casting the aqueduct in dramatic relief against the sky, you can't help but marvel at this duality. The Romans were both visionaries and victims of their ambition, architects of both triumph and turmoil. Each stone set in place is a reminder of the delicate balance between progress and hubris. And as you take a step back, you realize that your role in this grand tapestry is not just to lay stones, but to shape the very narrative of Rome, a story woven with threads of innovation and audacity. With the workday winding down, the thought of the legacy you're building lingers, invigorating you for the tasks that lie ahead. It's a reminder that history is not just a record of what was. It's an ongoing dialogue between the past and the future. And as you look toward the horizon, you know that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new stones to lift, and new tales to tell. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was built with vision, determination, and a touch of audacity, qualities that, much like the aqueducts, stand the test of time. And so, as you turn your back on the aqueduct and tread the well-worn path home, you find yourself mulling over the Roman knack for building things that last. I mean, when's the last time you saw a modern building still standing after 2 millennia? Rome's engineering feats aren't just relics of a bygone era. They are the bedrock of modern infrastructure, literally and figuratively. Take the Pont du Gard in France, for example. This towering aqueduct bridge, with its 3 tiers of arches, is a stone and mortar testament to Roman ingenuity. It hasn't just survived, it's thrived. Now a UNESCO World Heritage Site that attracts tourists like moths to a flame. It's like the Romans left us a giant stone post-it note saying, "You can thank us later." But of course, the Roman legacy is a double-edged sword, as sharp as a gladius and just as weighty. While their engineering prowess often seems like the stuff of legend, the reality was a bit more, shall we say, human. Let's debunk a few myths here. Romans weren't infallible. Their aqueducts and roads were marvels, yes, but they weren't immune to the occasional collapse or miscalculation. Consider the Aqua Traiana, which had its fair share of leaks and structural issues. Even the mighty Romans couldn't escape the occasional engineering hiccup. It's a reminder that even the greatest minds of antiquity had their off days, proof that perfection is a modern myth. And let's not sugarcoat the human cost of these marvels. The grandeur of Roman infrastructure was often built on the backs of those who had little choice in the matter. Slaves, captives from Rome's endless conquests, were the unsung, and often unwilling, heroes of these projects. Sure, The Romans gave us roads and aqueducts that still evoke awe, but they also left behind a legacy of exploitation. The laborers who toiled under the unyielding sun, shifting stones heavier than their own burdens, didn't get to bask in the glory of their achievements. Instead, they were the silent, invisible force ensuring that Rome remained invincible, or at least looked the part. However, the story of Roman engineering isn't just one of triumph and toil. It's also about influence and inspiration. The Romans didn't just build for their own time. They laid the groundwork for centuries of innovation. Their techniques and tools, from the simple groma to the complex aqueducts, became the blueprint for future generations. The Renaissance architects, for instance, didn't just rediscover Roman methods. They were practically fanboys, eagerly adopting and adapting these ancient techniques. Even today, Roman engineering principles are echoed in the bridges and water systems that crisscross our modern landscapes. It's like the ancient Romans are still whispering in our ears, saying, "We did it first." The allure of Roman engineering also comes from its blend of romance and reality. There's something undeniably romantic about the idea of a civilization so advanced could bring water from distant hills into the heart of a bustling metropolis. Yet, beneath this romantic veneer lies a gritty reality, a world where politics and propaganda were as much a part of the construction process as stone and mortar. Emperors like Vespasian used these grand projects as stage props in their bid for immortality, each arch, an aqueduct a testament to them. But for every awe-inspiring structure, there was a hidden cost, a reminder that even the most beautiful creations can cast long shadows. As you reach the threshold of your domus, ready to call it a day, you can't help but reflect on the complex tapestry of Roman engineering. It's a narrative woven with threads of ambition and audacity, brilliance and brutality. Each aqueduct and road wasn't just a feat of engineering. It was a statement, a declaration of Rome's unyielding spirit and its insatiable quest for dominance. But it's also a testament to the ordinary people who, brick by brick and stone by stone, brought these monumental visions to life. Roman engineering is a story of contrasts, the elegance of the arch juxtaposed with the harshness of forced labor, the precision of construction against the unpredictability of politics. It's a reminder that history is never just about the triumphs. It's about the struggles, the sacrifices, and the relentless drive to leave a mark on the world. And as you settle in for the evening, perhaps with a goblet of wine in hand, you realize that the legacy of Roman engineering is much like the empire itself. Vast, complex, and eternally fascinating. So, here's to the Romans, builders of aqueducts, shapers of cities, and architects of the future. They left us a world transformed, a legacy that continues to flow through our lives like water through an ancient conduit. And as you drift off to sleep, dreaming of arches and empires, remember that history isn't just something to be studied. It's something to be lived and occasionally marveled at. After all, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, or in this case, beneath the arches of aqueducts. Louis Roman XIV, journey to becoming the Sun King, began in a way that sounds like the start of a fairy tale, but without the fairy godmother or magic pumpkins. At merely 4 years old, little Louis found himself thrust into the spotlight as the King of France. It's hard to overstate just how bizarre this was. While most kids his age were still figuring out how to tie their shoes, or in 1638, buckle their shoes, Louis was figuring out how to wear a crown. But don't be fooled, this was no bedtime story. The reality was far from enchanting. Louis was born in 1638 to King Louis Roman XIII and Anne of Austria after a whopping 23 years of childless marriage. His birth was considered nothing short of miraculous. Some even called him a gift from God. This early reputation as a divine gift set the stage for Louis's lifelong belief in his own divine right to rule. But the kingdom he inherited wasn't exactly a well-oiled machine. France was in the throes of the Fronde, a series of civil wars where nobles decided they were bored with their privilege and wanted to gamble for more. The Fronde, which sounds like a fancy dessert, was anything but sweet. These rebellions were like a royal game of musical chairs, only with swords and a lot more screaming. The first Fronde, the Fronde of the Parliaments, kicked off in 1648. It was less about the common people rising up and more about high-born aristocrats who thought they should have a bigger say, or at least a bigger piece of the pie. Louis, just 10 years old at the time, was carted around the country like a very small and bewildered chess piece by Cardinal Mazarin, the real power behind the throne. Life during the Fronde was chaotic, to say the least. Imagine trying to do your homework while a riot breaks out in your living room. One night, young Louis and his mother had to flee Paris under the cover of darkness, escaping to Saint-Germain-en-Laye. This wasn't exactly an airbnb stay. They found the palace there unfurnished and had to rough it on straw mattresses. Think of it as a royal camping trip, minus the s'mores and stargazing. This experience left Louis with a deep-seated distrust of the nobility and a resolve that, when he was old enough, he'd never be in such a position of vulnerability again. Fast forward to 1653, and the Fronde finally fizzles out, leaving Louis with a kingdom in need of some serious TLC. By 1661, Mazarin had passed away, leaving 22-year-old Louis in the driver's seat. And boy, did he grab the wheel with both hands. In a move that would make any PR guru proud, Louis declared, "Elle est dat, c'est moi. I am the state." This wasn't just a catchy slogan. It was a declaration of his absolute power, his way of saying, "Step aside, I've got this." And thus began the era of Louis's iron-fisted rule. His belief in the divine right of kings wasn't just a personal quirk. It was his modus operandi. Louis figured if God had put him there, who was he to argue? This wasn't exactly a democratic sentiment, but it worked wonders for the monarchy's PR. The image of Louis as the Sun King, the shining center of France's universe, took hold. It's worth noting that Louis was a master of spin long before spin doctors were a thing. He commissioned art, architecture, and performances that glorified his reign and reinforced his image as the benevolent ruler ordained by heaven itself. But behind the glamour and grandeur, Louis's reign was also about control. He systematically reduced the power of the nobility, centralizing authority in himself. The nobles, who once had the audacity to rise against him, were now kept on a short leash, invited to Versailles to party and play while Louis quietly pulled the strings. Versailles itself was a masterstroke of distraction, a glittering palace where nobility could lose themselves in opulence, far removed from the gritty realities of governance. Louis's childhood experiences, especially the chaos of the Fronde, had shaped his vision of monarchy. He saw firsthand the disorder that could arise when power was dispersed among too many hands, and he was determined not to repeat those mistakes. The Sun King's reign was marked by an unwavering grip on power, an insistence on order, and a flair for the dramatic that kept everyone, from peasants to princes, focused on his radiant image. So, while young Louis's early days might have started with a crown on his head before he fully grasped the concept of personal hygiene, they set him on a path to becoming one of the most powerful and iconic monarchs in European history. And as for that divine right, whether or not the Almighty was keeping tabs on Louis, one thing's for sure. Louis Roman XIV certainly knew how to make people believe he was heaven-sent. So, the Sun King had his crown, his slogan, and his PR game on point. What he needed next was a stage worthy of his grand performance. Enter Versailles, a palace so opulent it made other royal residences look like fixer-uppers. Imagine the world's most extravagant airbnb, but this one could bankrupt a small nation. When Louis decided to transform his father's modest, hunting lodge into a symbol of absolute monarchy, he wasn't just thinking about home improvement. He was laying the groundwork for a living Instagram feed that would showcase his glory to the world. First up on the Versailles highlight reel, the infamous Hall of Mirrors. This wasn't just a fancy hallway. It was a masterpiece of optics, politics, and pure ego. Stretching over 230 feet, with 17 mirror-clad arches reflecting 17 windows, it was a dazzling display meant to amplify Louis's shine, literally and metaphorically. Each of the 357 mirrors was a testament to French craftsmanship. They were produced locally, despite the Venetian mirror monopoly, which was like trying to outdo Italy in pizza making. The Hall of Mirrors wasn't just about self-admiration, though there was plenty of that. It was a space for diplomatic triumphs and negotiations, the bright and reflective setting a constant reminder of the Sun King's luminous power. But let's not gloss over the costs. Versailles was a financial black hole, sucking in funds that could have fed armies, or, actually fed people. Maintaining the palace cost an eye-watering 25 million livres annually, enough to make even the most lavish spenders balk. While Louis had a seemingly endless appetite for grandeur, his treasury didn't. And yet, The splendor of Versailles served a purpose beyond ostentatious display. It was a gilded trap for the nobility. Louis turned the palace into a high-stakes game of social chess, where nobles were enticed to leave their power bases and play courtier in his glittering cage. The court at Versailles was the original reality show, complete with drama, alliances, and endless episodes of who wore it best. But let's talk etiquette, a word that probably makes you think of balancing books on your head or knowing which fork to use. At Versailles, etiquette was a full-contact sport. The Sun King's court functioned on a set of rules so arcane they make quantum physics look straightforward. Everything from the way you entered a room to how you folded your napkin was codified. If you were lucky enough to hold the candle while the king dressed, you were practically royalty yourself. Louis's obsession with etiquette wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was about control. By dictating the minutiae of court life, he ensured that everyone was too busy curtsying and bowing to plot anything more sinister. The king's daily ritual, known as the lever, was a prime example. As Louis rose each morning, a select group of nobles had the privilege of watching him get dressed, the ultimate status symbol in a world where proximity to the king was everything. While it might sound like the ultimate celebrity meet and greet, it was really a masterclass in keeping your enemies close. And then there was Louis's sun-themed branding, a PR move that would make a modern marketer weep with envy. Louis chose the sun as his emblem because, like the sun, he was the center of the universe, or at least the French universe. Everything revolved around him, from the arts to the military. He embodied the principles of order, harmony, and balance, casting his light over his subjects. But here's the kicker. The sun can also burn, and Louis's reign was as much about exerting fiery control as it was about radiant benevolence. Yet, for all the mythic grandeur, the reality of Versailles was less glamorous. The palace might have sparkled, but it didn't smell quite as sweet. With thousands of courtiers living on-site and no modern plumbing, the palace was essentially the world's most opulent outhouse. The gardens were a marvel of design, but they also served as a very public bathroom, with privacy, a luxury even the Sun King couldn't afford. Versailles was a microcosm of Louis's reign, dazzling on the surface, but with cracks you could drive a gilded carriage through. It was a place of extreme control, where every gesture was choreographed and every move scrutinized. The Sun King's ability to make the nobility dance to his tune was both his genius and his downfall. It kept potential rivals occupied, but it also isolated him from the realities of his people's lives. So, as the Sun King basked in his own glow, the kingdom beyond Versailles faced its own challenges. Louis's relentless focus on centralizing power and projecting an image of divine rule came at a cost that would eventually come due. But for now, in the golden halls of Versailles, the spectacle continued, with Louis Roman XIV at its glittering center, the ultimate showman in a world that couldn't help but watch. As we look ahead, it's clear that while the sun may set, the legacy of Louis's reign was just beginning its long shadow over France. While Louis Roman XIV dazzled in the golden halls of Versailles, his ambitions stretched far beyond the palace gates. His desire to dominate Europe was as grand as the palace itself, and he wasn't shy about flexing some military muscle to prove it. Enter the War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict that sounds like the dullest episode of a genealogy series, but was actually an epic showdown involving most of Europe. Picture a chessboard where every piece is a kingdom, and Louis, ever the strategist, is determined to call checkmate. Now, here's the setup. In 1700, the childless King Charles Roman II of Spain kicked the royal bucket, leaving the Spanish thrown up for grabs like the last slice of pizza at a family reunion. Charles, in his final act of royal mischief, bequeathed his empire to Louis's grandson, Philip of Anjou. This wasn't just a family affair. It was a power move that sent shockwaves across Europe. Suddenly, the Bourbon family, Louis's clan, was poised to unite France and Spain under one crown. Cue the collective gasp from rival powers who thought, "Oh no, we can't have that." Thus, the War of the Spanish Succession erupted in 1701, a tenacious tug-of-war over who got to wear the Spanish crown. England, the Dutch Republic, the Holy Roman Empire, and others formed the Grand Alliance, uniting in a keep France in check coalition. It was less about Spain and more about stopping Louis from becoming the ultimate European overlord. And who could blame them? The thought of Louis waltzing through Europe with 2 crowns perched on his head was enough to give any ruler a royal headache. The war slogged on for over a decade, a marathon of battles and sieges that left Europe reeling. Want numbers? How about this? The conflict involved roughly 400,000 soldiers at its peak, a staggering force that could have populated a medium-sized city. The war wasn't just a military affair. It was an economic black hole that sucked in resources faster than you can say bankruptcy. France alone racked up debts totaling over 3 billion livres, a sum so astronomical that it made Versailles' maintenance costs look like petty cash. But let's not gloss over the human cost. The war claimed an estimated 700,000 lives, a grim reminder that behind every strategic maneuver were soldiers and civilians caught in the crossfire. The battlefields of Blenheim, Ramillies, and Malplaquet became infamous for their bloodshed, with casualties in the tens of thousands. These weren't just statistics. They were fathers, sons, and brothers swept away in the tide of Louis's ambition. Now, if you're wondering why Louis didn't just call it quits and enjoy some croissants back at Versailles, here's the thing. He was in it for the long haul. Louis believed in his divine right to rule, and he wasn't about to let a little thing like a multinational coalition deter him. Stubbornness. Thy name is Louis Roman XIV. But running a war isn't just about winning battles. It's about keeping the home fires burning. And boy, did France feel the heat. The war effort strained the economy to the breaking point. Taxes soared, and food prices followed suit, leaving the common folk with little more than crumbs. If Versailles was the epitome of opulence, the rest of France was its stark contrast, a land of empty pockets and simmering discontent. Social tensions bubbled beneath the surface, with peasants bearing the brunt of the financial burden. Meanwhile, the nobles, still caught up in the Versailles soap opera, seemed oblivious to the hardships beyond their gilded cage. It was an unsustainable divide, a chasm between the haves and have-nots that would one day demand reckoning. But back to the war. Despite the odds stacked against him, Louis managed to hold his ground. The French military, under commanders like the formidable Marshal Villars, won significant victories that kept the Bourbon dream alive. Yet, the toll was undeniable. By the time the Treaty of Utrecht rolled around in 1713, Louis was ready to cut his losses. France retained some territories, but the dream of a united Franco-Spanish empire was dashed. Philip got to keep the Spanish throne, but with the caveat that the 2 crowns would never be united. A diplomatic version of you can have your cake, but you can't eat it too. The treaty marked the end of a grueling chapter, but its legacy lingered. France emerged battered and bruised, its economy in tatters, and its people weary from years of conflict. The Sun King's vision of European domination had been thwarted, leaving a kingdom grappling with the cost of its ruler's ambition. But let's not paint Louis as a one-dimensional villain twirling his mustache. His quest for power was driven by complex motives. He sought to expand France's influence, ensure the Bourbon dynasty's future, and perhaps most importantly, cement his place in history. In the grand narrative of his reign, the war was a testament to his relentless drive, a saga of triumphs and defeats that shaped the destiny of Europe. So, as the dust settled on the War of the Spanish Succession, Louis Roman XIV stood at a crossroads. The Sun King, whose light had shone so brightly, now faced the twilight of his reign. Yet, even as his dreams of empire faded, his legacy as one of history's most formidable monarchs was already etched in stone. The story of Louis Roman XIV was far from over, and as we look to the future, the shadows of his reign would continue to loom large over France and beyond. And so, with the Treaty of Utrecht ink barely dry, Louis Roman XIV turned his focus from the battlefields of Europe to the battlegrounds of his own heart, or perhaps more accurately, his entourage of affairs, which could rival any soap opera in complexity. The Sun King, it turns out, was as prolific in his romantic endeavors as he was in his territorial ambitions. His personal life was a whirlwind of intrigue, passion, and heartbreak, played out under the glittering chandeliers of Versailles. Let's start with his queen, Maria Theresa of Spain, a woman whose patience could have made Job look impulsive. Theirs was a political marriage, sealed in 1660 to cement peace between France and Spain. Maria Theresa bore Louis 6 children, but only one, the Dauphin Louis, survived to adulthood. Despite this shared tragedy, Louis was less a doting husband and more a philandering monarch. He reportedly assured Maria Theresa, "You are the only one I love," which, given his track record, was more a creative interpretation of marital vows than a literal truth. Now, you might think Louis's infidelities would be a scandal, but at Versailles, they were practically a spectator sport. Enter Louise de la Vallière, a mistress who captured Louis's heart, or at least his attention, for over a decade. Louise was the first of his famous mistresses, a role she played with all the melancholy of a Shakespearean heroine. She bore Louis several children, but the romance eventually soured, leaving Louise to retreat to a convent. Her story is a cautionary tale about the fleeting nature of royal favor, a theme that would repeat with unnerving regularity. And then there was Françoise Athénaïs, Marquise de Montespan, a woman who could outshine the Sun King himself in sheer charisma. Known simply as Madame de Montespan, she was the unofficial Queen of Versailles, with a sharp wit and sharper ambition. She bore Louis 7 children, and her influence over him was so extensive that people whispered of witchcraft. Whether or not she dabbled in the occult, spoiler, she probably didn't. Her reign as Louis's favorite was marked by opulence and scandal. The affair of the poisons, a murky scandal involving Parisian high society, even saw her name dragged through the mud, though she emerged largely unscathed, at least legally. But Louis's heart was a restless thing. Soon, it drifted to Françoise d'Aubigné, better known as Madame de Maintenon. A woman of modest means, she was the king's confidante, and later his secret wife. Because who doesn't love a royal plot twist? Their morganatic marriage, kept under wraps due to her less-than-royal lineage, was a testament to her influence and his affection. Madame de Maintenon wielded significant power behind the scenes, steering Louis towards a more pious and introspective later life. She was the steady hand at his side, as he navigated the complexities of aging and governance. And while Louis was busy writing his own romantic epic, religious tensions in France were heating up to a boil. The revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685 was a seismic shift, like pulling the rug out from under France's Protestant community. The edict, originally issued by Henry Roman IV in 1598, had granted Huguenots, French Protestants, limited religious freedoms. For nearly a century, it kept a tenuous peace, like a lid on a pot that's always at risk of boiling over. But in Louis's eyes, this religious pluralism was a blemish on his vision of a unified Catholic France. So, with a stroke of his quill, Louis dismantled the edict, declaring Protestantism illegal and forcing Huguenots to convert, flee, or face persecution. It was an edict that turned France into a pressure cooker of religious strife. The economic impact was staggering. Over 200,000 Huguenots fled France, taking with them their skills, crafts, and capital. They settled in more tolerant lands like England, the Netherlands, and the German states, strengthening their host economies at France's expense. Louis's short-sightedness cost France dearly, both in terms of talent and international reputation. But hey, when you're the Sun King, sometimes you confuse your own shadow for divine will. The human cost was even grimmer. Those who remained faced brutal crackdowns. Houses of worship were demolished, and pastors were exiled or executed. The infamous Dragonnades, a policy of billeting soldiers in Huguenot homes to encourage conversion, turned lives upside down. It was less come to the light and more convert or else, with an intimidation factor that would give modern PR nightmares. Louis, however, saw the revocation as a triumph, a consolidation of Catholic unity under his rule. He basked in the glow of what he believed was a moral victory, blind to the fractures it caused in the very fabric of French society. Sun King's insistence on religious conformity was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about control, a theme that ran through his reign like a golden thread through a tapestry. As the years crept on, Louis's once glorious reign began showing signs of wear. The endless wars, the economic strain, the political machinations, all took their toll. But it was the personal losses that perhaps weighed heaviest on the Sun King. In the twilight of his life, he buried his son, his grandson, and his great-grandson, all victims of a smallpox outbreak that ravaged Europe. The Sun King, who had once seemed untouchable, was now a solitary figure in the halls of Versailles, his court a shadow of its former self. Yet, even in his waning years, Louis remained a formidable presence. His legacy, a complex mosaic of grandeur and hubris, continued to cast a long shadow over France. The stage was set for the final act of his reign, a period marked by reflection and perhaps a reckoning with the choices that had defined his rule. And so, as the Sun King prepared to exit the stage, the world watched with bated breath. The legacy of Louis Roman XIV, a blend of brilliance and brutality, was far from a closed chapter. His reign was a testament to the intoxicating allure of power and its inevitable costs, a story that would echo through the corridors of history long after the sun had set on his empire. As the curtain drew on Louis Roman XIV reign, the Sun King was left to ponder the twilight of his once glorious empire. His reign, which had begun with such promise and spectacle, now faced the harsh realities of an economic downturn and widespread public disillusionment. The grand illusions of Versailles and the myth of the invincible monarch had started to crack under the weight of their own extravagance. Let's talk numbers for a second, because the Sun King's reign wasn't just about glittering palaces and military conquests. It was also about colossal debts that could make modern governments wince. By the time of Louis's death in 1715, France was staring down the barrel of a national debt so hefty it would take decades to pay off. The War of the Spanish Succession alone had cost France an estimated 3 billion livres, a figure that could have bankrolled several smaller nations. And while Louis had managed to maintain a veneer of control and splendor, the reality was that the kingdom was economically exhausted and socially strained. The common people of France, those whose lives were far removed from the opulent halls of Versailles, felt the crunch most acutely. Taxes had been raised to fund Louis's wars and his extravagant court, leaving the peasantry with little more than the scraps from the Sun King's table. Inflation soared, and bread riots became a common occurrence. The disconnect between the glittering court and the grimy reality of everyday life was never more apparent. It was a tale as old as time. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer, and somewhere in the middle, the scales of justice are left to gather dust. Yet despite the economic ruin and public discontent, Louis Roman XIV legacy was not entirely one of doom and gloom. The Sun King's reign saw the centralization of state power that would become a model for modern governance. His insistence on absolute control, while autocratic, laid the groundwork for a more unified French state. He also left behind a cultural legacy that was as rich as his coffers were empty. The arts flourished under his patronage, with luminaries like Molière and Lully creating works that would endure for centuries. His reign was a paradox, a time of both immense cultural achievement and stark social inequality. But how does history view Louis Roman XIV today? Well, it's a bit like looking at a painting by Monet. Up close, it's a mess of brushstrokes, but step back, and you see the masterpiece. Louis's reign was a complex tapestry of ambition, excess, and legacy. The myth of the Sun King, the regal image of a monarch who was the center of his universe, remains a powerful narrative. But scratch the surface, and you'll find the harsh reality of a ruler whose grand ambitions often overlooked the practical needs of his people. Louis's belief in the divine right of kings was both his greatest strength and his fatal flaw. It allowed him to consolidate power and project France as a dominant European force, but it also blinded him to the consequences of his actions. His revocation of the Edict of Nantes, for instance, was a move that seemed, in his eyes, like a righteous affirmation of Catholic unity. In reality, it was a disastrous policy that drove skilled Huguenots out of France, weakening the economy and shattering the social fabric. The legacy of Louis Roman XIV is a cautionary tale about the intoxicating allure of power and the inevitable costs that come with it. His reign demonstrates the perils of autocracy, where the whims of one man can shape the destiny of millions. Yet, it's also a testament to the enduring appeal of a ruler who could command the stage like no other. Louis was a showman, and his reign was the ultimate performance, a dazzling spectacle that captivated his audience even as the foundations crumbled beneath him. And so, as the Sun King took his final bow, he left behind a France that was at a crossroads. The seeds of revolution had been sown, and the very systems Louis had put in place would one day be challenged by the very people they were designed to control. The Sun King's reign was a lesson in the dual nature of power, its ability to create and its potential to destroy. In the end, Louis Roman XIV's story is a reminder that history is a mosaic of myth and reality. The Sun King shone brightly, casting long shadows over the land, a figure of both admiration and admonition. His reign was an era of contrasts, a time of extraordinary achievement and profound failure. And while the sun eventually set on his empire, its legacy endures, a testament to the complex dance between ambition and consequence, between dream and reality. So, as you mull over the life and times of Louis Roman XIV, remember this. The past is never as distant as it seems, and the lessons of history are as relevant today as they were in the days of the Sun King. In the grand tapestry of history, sometimes it's the long shots that hit the bullseye. Enter Babur, an ambitious Timurid prince who, quite frankly, was a bit down on his luck. Born in 1483 in what is now Uzbekistan, Babur was a descendant of Timur on his father's side and Genghis Khan on his mother's. Talk about a hefty family resume. But despite this illustrious lineage, Babur found himself scratching his head, wondering how to carve out a name for himself amidst the chaos of Central Asian politics. Enter the year 1526 and the first battle of Panipat, where Babur decided to roll the dice and change the course of Indian history forever. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Babur wasn't exactly the poster child for the romantic hero we often read about in sanitized history books. Sure, he was charismatic, and the guy could write poetry that would make Shakespeare blush. But he was also an opportunist with a penchant for gambling, literally and figuratively. Babur's initial forays into India were not driven by some grand vision of empire building, but rather by necessity. He was a ruler without a realm, a conqueror without a conquest, and India was the glittering prize waiting just across the mountains. Babur's journey into the Indian subcontinent wasn't a simple stroll through the park. It was more like a high-stakes chess game played on a board that stretched over 200 kilometers from Kabul to Delhi. The first battle of Panipat, fought on April 21, 1526, was Babur's opening move. Facing off against Ibrahim Lodi, the Sultan of Delhi, Babur had an army of just 12,000 men. Lodi, on the other hand, boasted a force 3 times that number. But here's where Babur's cunning came into play. He brought a little something called field artillery to the party. And let's just say, the elephants of Lodi's army were not fans of these noisy newcomers. With his strategic prowess and a bit of luck, Babur managed to rout Lodi's forces, securing his place as the founder of what would become the Mughal Empire. But before we unfurl the victory banner, it's crucial to note that Babur's victory was not the end of his challenges. It was just the beginning. Establishing an empire in a land as vast and diverse as India was no small feat. And while Babur might have been a legend in the making, the reality was that he had to navigate a minefield of political alliances, rebellious factions, and geographical hurdles that would make any modern-day logistics expert break into a cold sweat. Let's talk about the alliances for a moment. Babur was a master of the old diplomatic maneuver known as the enemy of my enemy is my friend. He forged critical alliances with local chieftains and regional power players who were disillusioned with the Lodi dynasty's rule. These alliances weren't just political pleasantries, they were survival tactics. Babur needed local support to maintain control over the territories he had won. But these alliances were as fickle as the weather, and keeping everyone happy was a balancing act worthy of Cirque du Soleil. Geographically, Babur faced a Herculean task. The Indian subcontinent, with its vast plains, dense forests, and towering mountain ranges, was a logistical nightmare. Supply lines had to be maintained across treacherous terrain, and communication over such distances was about as reliable as a carrier pigeon with a faulty GPS. Babur's ability to adapt to the geographical challenges of India is a testament to his leadership skills and his willingness to learn from the local populace, who had been navigating these lands long before he arrived. Now, let's take a moment to debunk the myth of Babur as a noble hero with a heart of gold. The truth is, Babur was a man of his time, brutal and ruthless when necessary. His conquest of India involved its fair share of bloodshed, and the spoils of war were not distributed with any sense of modern-day egalitarianism. Babur's own writings, the Baburnama, offer a candid glimpse into his mindset. He speaks with pride of the loot and the lands acquired, and his descriptions of battles are as vivid as they are unapologetic. Yet, Despite the gritty reality of his conquests, Babur's charisma and his knack for storytelling have endeared him to history. His memoirs paint a picture of a man who was as reflective as he was fierce. Babur was not just a conqueror. He was a chronicler, a poet, and a visionary who laid the foundations of an empire that would endure for over 3 centuries. But let's not crown him a saint just yet. Babur's rise to power was as much about seizing opportunities as it was about military might and strategic alliances. In the grand scheme of things, Babur's entry into India was a game-changer. It set the stage for the Mughal Empire, an entity that would blend Persian art, culture, and governance with the rich tapestry of Indian tradition. But as any good story goes, the rise of the Mughals was just as dramatic as their fall, and Babur's initial foray was only the opening act of a centuries-long epic filled with intrigue, innovation, and inevitable decline. So stick around, because we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this historical saga. So, with Babur's colorful entrance setting the stage, let's fast forward a few decades to the reign of Akbar the Great, arguably the Mughal Empire's rock star. Born in 1542, Akbar ascended to the throne in 1556 at the ripe age of 13. Now, before you picture a kid king playing with toy soldiers, let's clarify. Akbar was more of a young prodigy with a knack for turning chaos into harmony. And boy, did he have his work cut out for him, taking over an empire that was as diverse and sprawling as a buffet table at a wedding. Akbar's reign was nothing short of a master class in governance. Forget the image of a monarch lounging on a gold-plated throne, sipping on exotic drinks. Akbar was a hands-on ruler. He reformed the empire's administration with an efficiency that would make a modern-day bureaucrat weep with envy. His system of government, known as the Mansabdari system, was a stroke of genius. Think of it as a medieval version of LinkedIn, where officials were ranked based on their military and administrative capabilities, not just the size of their turban or the number of elephants in their parade. Speaking of elephants, let's talk about Akbar's court, a vibrant melting pot of cultures, languages, and ideas. He was a fan of what we might call strategic marriages, using matrimonial alliances like a chess master uses pawns. Over his lifetime, Akbar married at least 36 times. Yes, you heard that right, 36. But let's not romanticize these unions as tales of love and passion. They were more like diplomatic treaties sealed with a ring. Each wife brought with her a new set of connections, lands, or influence, making Akbar's empire as interconnected as a social media network. Forget Game of Thrones. This was Game of Marriages. Culturally, Akbar was the DJ mixing the tracks. He promoted a policy of Salaikal, or universal peace, which was less about singing Kumbaya and more about pragmatic governance. Recognizing the diversity of his subjects, who practiced Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, and more, Akbar took the radical step of abolishing the jizya tax on non-Muslims in 1564. This was not a move born out of altruism, but a calculated strategy to win hearts and minds, and boy, did it pay off. By fostering a sense of inclusion, he ensured that the empire remained stable and prosperous, a lesson some modern politicians could take a page from. But let's not sugarcoat things. Akbar was no saint. His initial campaigns to expand the empire were as ruthless as they were effective. Conquering regions like Gujarat and Bengal involved battles that were bloody and brutal, with casualties that would make anyone question the greatness in his title. Yet, once the dust settled, Akbar's approach was less about ruling with an iron fist and more about integrating these territories into a cohesive whole. He was like a corporate CEO who, after a hostile takeover, invites the acquired company's employees to the annual Christmas party. Economically, Akbar was the Steve Jobs of his time, innovating the empire's fiscal policies. He introduced a uniform tax system known as the Darsala system that was based on crop yields and paid in cash rather than kind. This was revolutionary, considering the previous system was about as reliable as a weather forecast in monsoon season. By standardizing revenue collection, Akbar ensured a steady flow of income that funded everything from grand architectural projects to his ever-expanding military. Ah, the military. Akbar's army was the empire's backbone, and he wasn't shy about flexing its muscles. But instead of relying solely on brute force, he emphasized technological advancements. He brought in experts in artillery and fortification, transforming his army into a formidable force that could hold its own against any adversary. The Mughal military became a well-oiled machine, and Akbar was the mechanic who kept it running smoothly. However, Akbar's true legacy might just be his patronage of the arts. Under his reign, the Mughal Empire became a cultural powerhouse. He was like a Renaissance prince, surrounding himself with poets, painters, musicians, and scholars. Fusion of Persian and Indian styles during his era gave birth to some of the most exquisite art and architecture the world has ever seen. The Red Fort in Agra and the city of Faidehpur Sikri are just a couple of examples of his architectural feats, each a testament to an era that blended elegance with grandeur. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Despite the glittering achievements, Akbar's reign was not without its hiccups. His religious policies, while progressive, didn't sit well with everyone. The orthodox Muslim factions weren't exactly thrilled with his attempts to create a syncretic religion called Din-i-Ilahi, which was about as popular as a fly at a picnic. Nevertheless, Akbar's vision of a unified empire, held together by tolerance and innovation, laid the groundwork for what would become one of the most powerful empires in history. Akbar's efforts to unify the diverse tapestry of India were as complex as they were ambitious. He was a ruler who understood that power wasn't just about control. It was about influence, collaboration, and vision. As the empire flourished under his watch, he transformed the Mughal court into a hub of intellectual and artistic exchange. Yet, for all his achievements, Akbar's legacy is a reminder that even the most successful rulers walk a tightrope between ambition and reality. And while he managed to keep his balance, the question remains, would his successors be as deft? Stay tuned, because the story of the Mughals is far from over, and the next chapters promise even more intrigue and drama. As the Mughal Empire strutted into its prime, it was like a peacock flaunting its feathers, dazzling, extravagant, and impossible to ignore. Enter Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, the two emperors who rode the empire's wave of glory, albeit steering it in rather different directions. Shah Jahan's reign was like the Oscars of the Mughal era, all glitz and glamour, with the Taj Mahal stealing the spotlight. But let's hold the applause for a moment and ask, was this opulence sustainable, or was it just a house of cards waiting for a stiff breeze? Shah Jahan, born in 1592, ascended the throne in 1628, and let's just say he had a flair for the dramatic. His architectural ventures were like a medieval Instagram feed, showcasing the empire's wealth and artistic prowess. The Taj Mahal, completed in 1643, is the crown jewel of this era, a marble mausoleum so ethereal it could make even the most hardened skeptic swoon. Built in memory of his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal, it employed over 20,000 workers and cost an eye-popping 32 million rupees. That's a lot of dough, even in today's terms. But here's the kicker. While the Taj Mahal was a love letter carved in stone, it was also a financial sinkhole that drained the empire's coffers faster than you can say extravagance. And Shah Jahan didn't stop there. His reign was marked by a veritable construction frenzy, including the Red Fort in Delhi and the Jama Masjid, each more grandiose than the last. But let's not kid ourselves. These architectural wonders were as much about ego as they were about empire. They were designed to awe and intimidate, a physical manifestation of Mughal power that could be seen from miles away and whispered about in courts across the world. Yet, as the saying goes, all that glitters is not gold. Behind the marble and gemstones lay a burgeoning economic crisis. The empire's agricultural economy was stretched thin, and the tax burden on the peasantry was as heavy as one of those ornate Mughal turbans. While the court reveled in its own splendor, the common folk were left to foot the bill, their backs bent under the weight of taxes and forced labor. It was a classic case of living large on borrowed time and borrowed money. Enter Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's son, and the empire's most controversial ruler. If Shah Jahan was the showman, Aurangzeb was the stern headmaster, cracking down on indulgence with a proverbial ruler. Born in 1618, Aurangzeb took the throne in 1658 after a bloody battle for succession that would make even Shakespeare's tragedies seem tame. His reign was marked by a return to orthodox Islam, and he wasn't shy about enforcing it. The jizya tax on non-Muslims made a comeback, and Hindu temples felt the hammer of his intolerance. But let's debunk a myth here. Aurangzeb wasn't just a religious zealot. He was a pragmatist as well. While his policies were undoubtedly divisive, they were also part of a broader strategy to consolidate power and control. His military campaigns expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent, stretching from Afghanistan in the west to the borders of modern-day Bangladesh in the east. But expansion came at a cost, and like a balloon filled with too much hot air, the empire was on the verge of bursting. Aurangzeb's religious policies, though effective in short-term consolidation, were a long-term liability. They alienated large segments of the population, sowing seeds of discontent that would eventually sprout into rebellion. The Marathas in the Deccan, Sikhs in Punjab, Rajputs of Rajasthan were not exactly thrilled with his attempts to enforce a monolithic religious identity. The empire's unity, once its greatest strength, began to fracture under the weight of internal dissent and external pressures. Economically, Aurangzeb's reign was a paradox. While he was frugal, cutting back on the lavish expenditures of his predecessors, the military campaigns drained the treasury faster than a leaky bucket. The cost of maintaining such a vast empire, with its endless borders and diverse populace, was astronomical. Add to that the decline in agricultural productivity and the rise of European trading powers like the British and the Dutch, and you have an economic cocktail that was anything but refreshing. The court life under Aurangzeb was a far cry from the opulent gatherings of Shah Jahan's time. Where once there was music and poetry, now there was austerity and discipline. Aurangzeb was more likely to be found praying than partying, and his disdain for the arts was as palpable as the tension in his court. Yet, for all his attempts to steer the empire towards a more pious path, he couldn't escape the complexities of ruling such a diverse and expansive domain. In the end, Aurangzeb's reign was a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess and zeal. His efforts to impose a singular identity on a pluralistic society were as doomed as a snowman in the Sahara. The empire that had once been a beacon of cultural fusion and economic prosperity was now a shadow of its former self, stretched too thin and burdened by internal strife. But let's not wrap up the story just yet. The Mughal Empire, despite its cracks and contradictions, still had a few tricks up its sleeve. The tale of its decline is as riveting as its rise, filled with intrigue, innovation, and inevitable change. So stick around, because the next chapter promises to delve even deeper into the complexities of an empire that, for better or worse, left an indelible mark on the tapestry of history. As the Mughal Empire stumbled into the late 17th century, it was like watching a once great rock band slowly unravel. The frontman, Aurangzeb, had left the stage, and now the successors were trying to keep the show alive with a broken guitar and a sporadic drummer. The empire, in all its previously grandiose glory, was showing cracks that no amount of marble could patch up. First up on this parade of mediocrity was Bahadur Shah I, who took the throne in 1707. He was like the substitute teacher who walks into a classroom of rowdy students expecting respect just because he showed up. His reign, lasting a mere 5 years, was less about groundbreaking policies and more about putting out fires, quite literally. The empire was a tinderbox of rebellion and discontent, and Bahadur Shah I was armed with a water pistol. His efforts to placate the Marathas, Sikhs, and Rajputs were about as effective as using a band-aid on a bullet wound. He might have been the emperor, but he was more of a placeholder until the next act. Speaking of acts, let's talk about the supporting cast, the governors, generals, and regional rulers who were supposed to keep the empire's machinery well-oiled. Instead, they were like a group of cats, each going its own way. The empire, once a cohesive unit under the strong hands of Babur, Akbar, and even Aurangzeb, was now more like a loose confederation of territories. Each governor, or nawab, was an emperor in his own right, collecting taxes and ruling as he pleased. Think of it as a medieval franchise system, where each nawab paid lip service to the Mughal crown, but acted more like an independent CEO. Economically, the empire was gasping for air. With the treasury as empty as a poet's wallet, the Mughals were forced to rely on the age-old tactic of squeezing the peasantry for taxes. But here's the kicker: the peasantry had nothing left to give. Years of war and mismanagement had left the agricultural economy in tatters, and the once bustling trade routes were now as lively as a ghost town. The empire was in debt up to its ears, borrowing money from local merchants to fund campaigns that were doomed to fail. It was like trying to fill a sinking ship with water, futile and counterproductive. Enter the British East India Company, stage left. These guys weren't your run-of-the-mill traders. They were a corporation with the kind of ambition that makes hedge fund managers look like hobbyists. Established in 1600, the company had been lurking around the Indian subcontinent, initially setting up shop in places like Surat and Madras. By the 18th century, they were more than just traders. They were political players with their eyes on the prize. And that prize was India, ripe for the taking. The company was like a chess master, playing the long game while the Mughals were busy squabbling over pawns. They capitalized on the empire's fragmentation, signing treaties with regional rulers and offering military support in exchange for trade privileges. It was diplomacy with a touch of extortion, a win-win for the Brits and a lose-lose for the Mughals. The Battle of Plassey in 1757 was a turning point, where the British forces, led by Robert Clive, defeated the Nawab of Bengal. This victory was not just a military triumph, but a strategic masterstroke, giving the company control over one of the richest provinces in India. Now, let's debunk a popular myth that the Mughal Empire collapsed overnight. In reality, the decline was more like a slow-motion car crash. The empire didn't just crumble, it eroded over decades, chipped away by internal corruption, external threats, and a changing world that the Mughals failed to navigate. The rise of the British East India Company was not the cause of the collapse. It was a symptom of a deeper malaise. A once great empire unable to adapt to the new realities of global trade and shifting power dynamics. Meanwhile, regional powers like the Marathas were rising from the ashes of Mughal mismanagement. Under leaders like Shivaji and later, his descendants, the Maratha Confederacy became a formidable force, challenging Mughal authority across the subcontinent. The Marathas weren't just rebels, they were nation builders, adept at using guerrilla tactics and forming alliances that would make any Mughal emperor break out in a cold sweat. By the mid-18th century, they controlled vast swaths of territory, effectively carving out their own empire within the crumbling Mughal framework. As for the Mughal emperors who followed, they were more like puppets on a string, their authority as fragile as a house of cards. Farrukhsiyar, Muhammad Shah, and the rest of the gang were emperors in name only, with little real power to command the loyalty of their subjects or their own court. The Mughal court, once a hub of intellectual and artistic exchange, was now a hotbed of intrigue and conspiracy, as noble factions vied for influence over a powerless emperor. By the time Shah Alam Roman II took the throne in 1760, the Mughal Empire was more of an idea than a reality. His reign was marked by a series of humiliations, including the infamous sack of Delhi by the Persian invader Nader Shah in 1739, a prelude to the chaos that would define his rule. The empire's territories were slipping away like sand through a sieve, and Shah Alam Roman II was left to preside over the remnants. His attempts to regain control were thwarted by the Marathas, the British, and his own courtiers, each pulling the empire in different directions. Yet, even in its decline, the Mughal Empire left an indelible mark on the Indian subcontinent. Its architectural wonders, administrative systems, and cultural legacy continued to influence the region long after the empire itself had faded into history. The Mughals, for all their flaws, had woven a rich tapestry of cultural fusion that would endure for generations. As we stand on the precipice of the 19th century, the stage is set for the final act of this historical drama. The British East India Company, having outmaneuvered the Mughals and regional powers alike, is poised to tighten its grip on the subcontinent. The Mughal emperors, reduced to figureheads, will watch as the world they once ruled slips away. But don't tune out just yet. There's more intrigue, innovation, and inevitable change to come, as the story of the Mughals reaches its poignant conclusion. Stay tuned, because the final chapter promises to be as riveting as the rise and fall that preceded it. As the Mughal Empire limped into the 19th century, its legacy loomed larger than its living presence. Picture it as a grand old theatre, once bursting with the glamour of 1,000 performances, now echoing with the whispers of past glories. The British East India Company had taken center stage, and the Mughals were left clinging to the curtain, desperately trying to remain relevant. Yet, despite their fall from grace, the Mughals left an indelible mark on the Indian subcontinent, a tapestry of cultural, architectural, and administrative threads that continue to weave through India's present. Let's talk architecture, the Mughal Empire's calling card, if you will. The Taj Mahal, Red Fort, and Humayun's tomb are more than just Instagram hotspots. They're architectural marvels that scream, look what we can do with a few thousand laborers and a truckload of marble. The Mughals didn't just build structures, they built symbols of power and cultural syncretism. They took Persian styles, added a dash of Indian flair, and voila, an architectural legacy that would influence generations. The Mughal style blended domes, minarets, and intricate carvings in a way that was as harmonious as a well-conducted orchestra. This wasn't just art for art's sake. It was a visual assertion of dominance and sophistication, a stone-clad message that the Mughals were rulers of both land and imagination. Now, let's pivot to administration, the unsung hero in the Mughal saga. Akbar's Mansabdari system was a masterpiece of governance, turning the empire into a well-oiled machine that even modern-day bureaucracies might envy. It was a merit-based system that ranked officials according to their capabilities, not just their proximity to the throne. Imagine LinkedIn, but for medieval administrators, where your rank was determined by your skills, not just your connections. The Mughals were among the first to introduce standardized revenue collection, using crop yields as a basis for tax assessments. This was revolutionary in a world where tax collection was often akin to a treasure hunt with no map. By basing taxes on actual production, they ensured a more predictable revenue stream, which was crucial for funding wars and, of course, those extravagant building projects. But it wasn't all about bricks and bureaucracy. The Mughals were cultural trendsetters, merging Persian, Indian, and even Central Asian influences into a rich tapestry of art, music, and literature. The Mughal court was a melting pot of poets, musicians, and artists, each contributing to a cultural renaissance that would outlast the empire itself. Take the miniature paintings, for example, tiny canvases bursting with color and detail, capturing everything from courtly love to epic battles. They were the snapshot stories of their day, capturing moments with precision and flair, albeit a bit more permanent and a lot less duck-faced. Despite all the glitz and glam, let's not gloss over the gritty bits. The Mughals were no strangers to the darker sides of power. Their rule was as much about swordplay as it was about statecraft. The empire was built on conquest, maintained through alliances, and occasionally, let's be honest, a bit of good old-fashioned coercion. The jizya tax on non-Muslims, reinstated by Aurangzeb, was a tool of both revenue and religious control, a reminder that the empire's inclusive facade had its fractures. So, what lessons can we glean from this epic saga of rise and fall? The Mughals teach us that adaptability is key. Their initial success was due to their ability to blend cultures and ideas, to adapt Persian governance to Indian realities, and to turn diverse territories into a cohesive empire. But as the world changed around them, they clung to old ways, unable to adapt to new economic realities and the shifting power dynamics brought on by European traders. Their story is a cautionary tale for any empire, modern or ancient. Conquest may build an empire, but adaptability sustains it. Another takeaway is the importance of unity in diversity. The Mughals at their peak were masters of inclusion, bringing together a kaleidoscope of cultures under one banner. Akbar's policy of Salai-Kul, or universal peace, was not just a slogan. It was a practical approach to governance that recognized the empire's diversity as a strength rather than a weakness. By embracing this melting pot of cultures, the Mughals fostered stability and prosperity, a lesson that resonates in today's multicultural societies. In the end, the Mughals were as complex as the empire they ruled, an empire of contradictions, where marble palaces were built on the backs of a taxed peasantry, where poets and painters thrived under a regime of military might. Their legacy is a reminder that history is never black and white. It's a rich tapestry of successes and failures, of beauty and brutality. So, as we close the curtain on the Mughals, let's not just remember the grandeur of their monuments or the intricacies of their administration. Let's also remember the lessons they left behind. lessons in adaptability, unity, and the art of balancing power with pragmatism. After all, the rise and fall of the Mughals is more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a mirror reflecting the timeless dance of ambition and reality. Kingdom of Axum was like the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, but instead of apps and iPhones, they traded spices and ivory. Nestled in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea, Axum sat smack in the middle of a trade route that had Roman merchants to the west and Indian traders to the east drooling over its strategic real estate. Think of it as the crossroads where old-school globalization happened, minus the digital maps and coffee-fueled tech entrepreneurs. Instead, these guys navigated vast deserts and hazardous seas without so much as a compass app. If the ancients could see us now with our pocket-sized GPS, they'd probably roll their eyes and wonder why it took us so long to figure things out. Now, let's talk geography, because in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. Axum was perched high on a plateau, giving it a natural fortress vibe, with a panoramic view of trade routes stretching across the Red Sea and beyond. This wasn't just a pretty perch, it was a strategic gold mine. Situated between the Roman Empire and India, Axum was like the ultimate ancient trading hotspot. Imagine a bustling marketplace with Roman coins jingling alongside Indian spices. It was a place where cultures collided, traded, and occasionally threw a party that would make modern festival-goers envious. But here's where the myth-busting begins. Legends have painted Axum as this mystical kingdom founded by the likes of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, which sounds like the plot of a high-budget fantasy movie. The reality, however, is a bit less cinematic. While those stories are great for impressing your friends over dinner, the truth is, Axum's rise was more about savvy trade deals and less about divine interventions. The kingdom's origins were rooted in local tribes coming together, not unlike a rock band forming in someone's garage. They capitalized on their prime location and natural resources, gradually building up a reputation that attracted merchants from far and wide. Speaking of trade, Axum was a master at playing the market. They dealt in gold, ivory, and exotic animals, but it was their control over the Red Sea trade routes that really filled their coffers. Imagine the scene. Roman merchants arriving with gold coins stamped with Emperor Hadrian's face, swapping them for elephant tusks and frankincense. And let's not forget the savvy Indian traders, who came bearing spices and textiles that would later become the must-have items of the Roman elite. Axum's markets were a cacophony of languages and haggling that would put Wall Street to shame. Economic success of Axum wasn't just about luck or location. It was about knowing how to leverage what you have, which is a lesson some of us could take to heart today. With their fingers in so many trade pies, Axumite kings minted their own coins, making them one of the few African civilizations of the time to do so. These coins were not just for making it rain at the local market. They were a statement of power and economic stability. And let's be honest, nothing says, "We've made it," quite like having your face on currency. Now, if you're thinking that all this trade must have made Axum a bit of a cultural melting pot, you're spot on. The constant influx of traders and travelers meant that Axum was a place where ideas flowed as freely as goods. This was a society that wasn't afraid to borrow, adapt, and innovate. They took cues from their neighbors, like adopting Christianity in the 4th century, making them one of the first major empires to do so. Talk about trendsetters. Axum was the influencer of its day, shaping religious and cultural practices that would ripple through history. But let's not romanticize everything. While Axum's rise was dazzling, it wasn't all sunshine and spices. Its power play was as much about political maneuvering as it was about trade. Behind the scenes, there were alliances to be forged and enemies to be kept at bay. The Red Sea wasn't always calm, and neither were Axum's relations with rival kingdoms. Competition was fierce, and the stakes were high. This was a world where one wrong move could sink your trade network faster than a poorly planned IPO. So, while the legends of Axum's founding make for captivating tales, the true story is far more intriguing. It's a story of how geography, trade, and a bit of political acumen can turn a kingdom into a powerhouse. And let's face it, if the Axumites had access to Google Maps, they might have conquered the world before breakfast. But even without modern tech, they carved out a legacy that still echoes through the corridors of history. Now, if you think Axum's story was all about geography and a penchant for trading, you'd only be scratching the surface of this ancient powerhouse. The real secret sauce. Economic ingenuity that would make even the savviest Wall Street broker raise an eyebrow. Let's break it down. Axum wasn't just dealing in trade, it was playing a high-stakes game of economic chess, and its piece de resistance was its strategic dominance over key commodities like ivory and gold. Picture this. Ivory, the ancient equivalent of owning stocks in a tech startup. Highly coveted, rare, and a symbol of status, ivory was the bling of its time. And Axum, they had it in spades. Thanks to the African elephants roaming within their territory, Axum held a near monopoly on the ivory trade. This wasn't just about having a good product. It was about controlling the market. Axumite traders were like the Jeff Bezoses of their day, with ivory being their Amazon prime. They had a knack for getting this luxury item into the hands of Roman elites faster than you can say 2-day shipping. But Axum's true genius lay in its use of coinage. While other ancient civilizations were still bartering like it was nobody's business, Axum was busy minting coins, a move that was both practical and symbolic. These weren't just any coins, mind you. They were stamped with images of their kings, like the infamous King Ezana, who ruled in the early 4th century. Picture your face on a coin, talk about a power move. This wasn't just about facilitating trade. It was about broadcasting stability and strength, much like a modern-day country issuing bonds to show it's open for business. Now, if you're wondering how this all played out on the ground, let's take a stroll through an ancient Axumite marketplace. You'd find bustling traders hawking everything from gold to exotic animals. Gold, much like today, was the international currency of backroom deals and political machinations. Axum, sitting pretty at the crossroads of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, was perfectly positioned to funnel gold from the African interior to markets across the known world. In this ancient marketplace, traders weren't just haggling over prices. They were building relationships and weaving a complex web of economic alliances that stretched across continents. And just like today's stock market, Axum's trade was subject to the whims of fashion and desire. When the Romans developed a taste for silk and spices from India, Axumite traders were quick to pivot, becoming middlemen in this growing demand. Imagine Axum's trade routes as the Silk Road of the sea, with goods flowing like a well-oiled supply chain, sans the logistics software. These routes were the lifeblood of Axum's economy, ensuring that the kingdom remained not just relevant, but indispensable. However, let's not get carried away by the romance of it all. The tales of Axum's fabled wealth are like those Instagram posts of perfect beach vacations, enticing, but only part of the story. The reality was that maintaining this trade hegemony required constant vigilance and a fair bit of political maneuvering. The Red Sea wasn't just a tranquil highway. It was a contested zone where pirates and rival kingdoms lurked like modern-day hackers waiting to pounce. Axumite traders needed to be shrewd navigators, both literally and metaphorically, to keep their ships and livelihoods afloat. The strategic use of coinage wasn't just about economic stability. It was also a form of soft power, a message to friends and foes alike that Axum was a force to be reckoned with. This was a kingdom that understood the importance of branding long before it became a buzzword in corporate boardrooms. By asserting their presence through coinage, the Axumites were doing more than just facilitating trade. They were embedding themselves in the economic psyche of the ancient world. Yet, as with any booming economy, there were challenges. The influx of wealth and trade brought with it issues of inequality and social tension. Not everyone in Axum was living the high life, and the gap between the rich and the poor could be as vast as the Red Sea itself. This was a kingdom where power and prosperity were concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority toiled to keep the wheels of trade turning. It's a tale as old as time, or at least as old as the first economic disparity report. So, as we sift through the glittering legends of Axum's wealth, it's crucial to remember that beneath the gold and glamour lay a complex reality. The kingdom's prosperity was built on a foundation of strategic trade routes, savvy economic policies, and a little bit of luck. And while myths often paint Axum as an ancient utopia, the truth was a more nuanced tapestry of triumphs and trials. Stay tuned, because there's more to this story than meets the eye, and we're only just getting started. So, as the shimmering mirage of Axum's wealth fades into more complex reality, let's pivot to another cornerstone of any great civilization, its power dynamics. Forget about the myth of a peaceful, harmonious kingdom. Axum was as politically charged as a modern election year, albeit with fewer televised debates and more diplomatic intrigue. First off, let's talk rulers. Axum wasn't exactly a democracy, which won't surprise anyone who spent 5 minutes reading about ancient kingdoms. It was an empire led by a series of kings who ruled with the kind of authority that would make even the most seasoned CEO blush. Take King Ezana, for instance. Ruling in the early 4th century, he was a trailblazer, not just for his adoption of Christianity, but for his firm grip on power. Think of him as a mix of religious pioneer and shrewd politician, a kind of ancient multi-hyphenate. Under Ezana, Axum officially embraced Christianity, a move that was as much about consolidating power as it was about spiritual enlightenment. By aligning with the emerging Christian Roman Empire, Ezana wasn't just securing a place in the annals of theological history. He was also forging a political alliance that would bolster Axum's standing on the international stage. It's as if he signed the ancient equivalent of a strategic partnership, one that came with both divine blessings and a seat at the geopolitical table. But don't let the holy aura fool you. This was no come-bear moment. The transition to Christianity was a strategic maneuver that helped unify the kingdom under a singular religious banner, strengthening Ezana's rule internally while extending Axum's influence externally. It was a classic playbook move. Use religion to unite the people and gain legitimacy. Today, we might call it soft power, but back then, it was just smart governance. Of course, with great power comes even greater responsibility, or, in Axum's case, the need to keep a watchful eye on rivals and rebellious subjects. The kingdom's political landscape was a delicate balance of alliances and enmities. Much like a high-stakes game of chess, each move had to be calculated to maintain the equilibrium of power. Neighboring kingdoms weren't exactly sending fruit baskets to Axum. They were competitors vying for influence and resources. The Red Sea Corridor, that bustling superhighway of trade, was a constant battleground for dominance. While Axum was busy minting coins and forging alliances, it was also dealing with internal power struggles that would make your average office politics look like a walk in the park. The kingdom's social dynamics were as intricate as its economic ones. The elite, who enjoyed a life of luxury thanks to the wealth flowing through the trade routes, were often at odds with the working class, who kept the empire's heart beating. This tension was an ever-present undercurrent, stirring the pot of social unrest. Now, let's debunk another myth, the idea of Axum as a utopian society where everyone sang in harmony. The reality was far grittier. Power was concentrated at the top, and the kings weren't above using force to maintain their grip. Political rivalries could be as thorny as a cactus patch, and betrayal wasn't uncommon. Axum was a place where alliances could shift as quickly as the desert sands, and trust was often a luxury that few could afford. The political landscape was also shaped by Axum's military prowess. The kingdom maintained a formidable army, capable of both defending its borders and projecting power beyond them. This was no small feat in an era when a strong military could mean the difference between thriving and merely surviving. The army was a tool of both defense and expansion, ensuring that Axum's neighbors thought twice before challenging its authority. Religion, too, played a dual role in Axum's political tapestry. It was both a unifying force and a means of control. The integration of Christianity wasn't just a spiritual shift. It was a strategic consolidation of power that mirrored modern-day political religious dynamics. If you think using religion to sway popular opinion is a new trick, think again. Axum's rulers were masters of this game long before the term religious right became a part of modern political discourse. In the grand narrative of Axum, the interplay between politics, religion, and social order was as complex as it was fascinating. This was a kingdom that understood the importance of image, both internally and on the world stage. The Axumites were adept at crafting a narrative that projected strength and stability, even as they navigated the turbulent waters of political intrigue and social unrest. So, while Axum's history is often cloaked in the romance of its economic success and religious innovations, the reality is a more textured tale of power plays and political maneuvering. It's a story that reminds us that the past, much like the present, was a stage where the actors were skilled at playing their parts, knowing that one misstep could lead to their downfall. As we delve deeper into the annals of Axum, remember that we're not just uncovering the past, we're exploring the timeless dance of power and politics, a dance that continues to echo through the ages. And stay tuned, because the story of Axum is far from over, and the next act promises to be just as compelling. The dance of power and politics in Axum, a saga filled with both grandeur and grit. But if you thought Axum was just sitting pretty on its plateau, minting coins and throwing religious soirees, think again. This kingdom was knee-deep in the diplomatic and military escapades that would make today's political strategists break into a nervous sweat. First, let's set the stage with some neighbors, because every good story needs a supporting cast. Axum was surrounded by a colorful collection of allies and adversaries, each with their own agendas. To the north, the kingdom of Kush was like that competitive sibling always trying to outshine Axum's latest achievement. Meanwhile, the Sasanian Empire was the ambitious neighbor with a flair for military pageantry, and the Roman Empire was the big-shot cousin who everyone wanted to impress, or at least not tick off. In this world of shifting alliances, Axum's rulers were like chess grandmasters, always thinking a few moves ahead. Take King Caleb, for instance. He was the kind of leader who didn't just play the game, he rewrote the rules. Around the early 6th century, Caleb decided to flex Axum's military muscles by intervening in the affairs of the Himyarite kingdom in modern-day Yemen. It was a classic case of my neighbor's enemy is my friend, as Caleb sought to protect the region's Christian population from persecution. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just a humanitarian mission. It was also about securing trade routes and expanding Axum's influence. Talk about killing two birds with one diplomatic stone. Caleb's campaign against the Himyarites was like a high-stakes poker game. He sent a fleet across the Red Sea, and for a while, things looked like they were going Axum's way. But here's where the myth of invincibility starts to crumble. Despite initial successes, the campaign eventually hit a snag, like when you're lost in a maze of IKEA furniture assembly. Local uprisings and logistical challenges turned the tide against Caleb, and his forces were forced to pull back. It was a humbling reminder that even the mightiest can trip over their own ambitions. But Axum wasn't just about playing offense. They knew how to keep the peace when necessary. Their diplomatic efforts were as intricate as medieval tapestry, weaving together alliances that would ensure their survival in a region where betrayal was as common as dust storms. By maintaining good relations with the Byzantines, Axum secured a crucial ally who could help counterbalance the growing power of the Sasanian Empire. It was a delicate dance of give and take, where one wrong move could lead to isolation faster than a rogue tweet. Now, let's dispel another myth. The notion that Axum was some kind of untouchable fortress. Truth is, even the most fortified kingdom can have its Achilles heel. In the late 3rd century, Axum faced a formidable opponent in the form of the Himyarites, who were no strangers to naval warfare. The Himyarites attacked Axum's ports, disrupting trade routes like a Black Friday sale gone awry. This was a serious setback for a kingdom that relied heavily on maritime commerce to keep its economy afloat. The reality was that Axum's military might, though impressive, was not without its flaws. The kingdom had its fair share of oops moments, like underestimating the resilience of its adversaries or overextending its resources. These setbacks serve as a poignant reminder that even the most well-planned strategies can fall victim to the whims of fate or just plain bad luck. In the grand scheme of things, Axum's interactions with its neighbors were a microcosm of the broader geopolitical landscape. It was a world where diplomacy and warfare were two sides of the same coin, each essential to the kingdom's survival and prosperity. The Axumites were masters at navigating this treacherous terrain, but even they weren't immune to the occasional misstep. As we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of Axum's history, remember that it's a story of both triumph and tribulation. It's a tale of how a kingdom rose to prominence through shrewd diplomacy and military prowess, only to face the harsh realities of power and ambition. The legend of Axum may be steeped in romance, but beneath the surface lies a gritty reality that speaks to the timeless challenges of leadership and legacy. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the annals of Axum, exploring the fascinating interplay between diplomacy, warfare, and the ever-shifting balance of power in a world where nothing was ever truly certain. There's more to this tale than meets the eye, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting as the last. As Axum's history unfurls, we find ourselves at the twilight of a once mighty kingdom. It's like watching the fall of a rock star who once sold out stadiums, but now struggles to fill a dive bar. So, what went wrong for Axum? Let's dissect this decline with surgical precision, tossing in a few wry observations along the way. First up, the economic downturn. It wasn't quite the 2008 financial crisis, but for Axum, it was serious business. The kingdom had thrived on its bustling trade routes, but by the 7th century, these lifelines started to resemble a congested freeway during rush hour. The rise of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula rerouted the trade networks like a GPS with a vendetta, leaving Axum scratching its head and its coffers significantly lighter. With the Red Sea under new management, Axum's once thriving economy sputtered like a car running on fumes. No more Roman coins jingling through the marketplace, no more exotic goods flowing in like ancient Amazon deliveries. But wait, there's more. Nature decided to throw a curveball, just to spice things up. Environmental factors kicked in like an unwelcome guest, overstaying their welcome. Soil erosion and deforestation took a toll on agriculture, reducing yields and leading to food shortages. Picture the landscape. Once fertile lands now barren and unyielding, much like a deserted Instagram influencer's feed. The climate changes, while subtle, were enough to exacerbate the kingdom's woes, turning Axum's agricultural bounty into a ghost of its former self. Then there's the political landscape, which was less a well-tended garden and more a tangled mess of weeds. Internal strife and succession, disputes frayed the kingdom's unity like a soap opera plot gone haywire. Imagine a Game of Thrones scenario, but with fewer dragons and more bickering aristocrats. Power struggles within the royal family and among regional leaders weakened Axum's grip, leaving it vulnerable to external pressures. By the 8th century, the once unified kingdom was more fragmented than a smartphone screen after an unfortunate meeting with concrete. Let's not forget the external pressures, always a crowd favorite in the decline of empires. The growing influence of neighboring Islamic states and the shifting sands of trade routes meant that Axum found itself increasingly sidelined. It was like being the VHS in a world suddenly obsessed with DVDs, innovative once, but now left collecting dust. The kingdom's military, once formidable, struggled to keep up with the changing dynamics. Its resources spread too thin like butter over too much toast. Yet, despite all this, Axum's story isn't just one of decline and fall. There's a legacy here that echoes through the ages, a testament to its former glory. The kingdom was one of the first to mint coins in sub-Saharan Africa, and these little metal discs are now prized artifacts, windows into a world where Axum's kings ruled with both economic and literal clout. Its early adoption of Christianity left a lasting spiritual imprint, with Ethiopian Christianity tracing its roots back to the kingdom's conversion in the 4th century. Axum's obelisks, towering and intricate, still stand as silent witnesses to an era of architectural prowess and artistic sophistication. In modern terms, Axum's story is a cautionary tale of how geopolitical shifts can upheave even the most established powers. It's a reminder that resting on one's laurels, or in Axum's case, its strategic trade routes, is never a good strategy when the winds of change are blowing strong. Imagine a modern corporation ignoring market trends and refusing to innovate. Axum was that company, left behind as the world moved on. And yet, the romantic allure of Axum persists, like a bedtime story that refuses to fade. Legends of its wealth and power, of its mysterious origins tied to figures like the Queen of Sheba, continue to captivate the imagination. These tales, while not strictly factual, serve as a reminder of humanity's love affair with the past and our penchant for embellishment. After all, who doesn't love a good story, even if it's sprinkled with a bit of creative license? As we wrap up our journey through Axum's history, it's clear that the kingdom's legacy is more than just a footnote in ancient history textbooks. It's a complex tapestry woven with threads of ambition, trade, religion, and power. A story that, despite its end, continues to resonate. So, the next time you find yourself caught up in the myth of an ancient civilization, remember Axum. Remember its highs and lows, its legends and realities, and the lessons it offers for a world that's still very much in love with its own narratives. After all, the past is more than just a series of events. It's a mirror reflecting the timeless dance of human endeavor. Ah, the sweet serenade of rooster crows and the earthy aroma of a new day. You're awake, but don't expect a gentle easing into the morning. It's the crack of dawn, and in ancient China, that means it's time to roll out of your straw mat and get hustling. The sun's barely hinting at making its grand entrance, but your day starts now. You're living in a time when snooze buttons are mere figments of the future. Let's get down to brass tacks. Rice. It's not just a side dish. It's the lifeline of your existence. You and millions of others, scattered across the sprawling landscape of dynastic China, are knee-deep in the rice fields. This isn't some quaint lifestyle choice. It's the economic backbone of the empire. You're part of an agricultural machine that's been humming along for centuries. Here's a juicy tidbit. By the Han Dynasty, roughly 90% of the population was pushing plows, not pens. Now, let's talk about the myths. A rustic life, filled with pastoral bliss and meditative harmony. Spoiler alert, it's less Zen retreat, more CrossFit boot camp. You're not strolling through fields of gold. You're slogging through mud, bent over double, planting rice stalks one by one. Your back will remind you later just how much it despises you, but who cares about lumbar support in the grand tapestry of history? Rice cultivation isn't just about getting your hands dirty. It's about timing, precision, and an intimate relationship with the elements. You're part of a cycle that's dictated by the whims of the seasons. Miss the planting season by even a whisker, and you're risking famine. Too much rain, too little rain, each one a potential disaster. Your livelihood is a gamble with Mother Nature, and she's a notoriously fickle dealer. Economically speaking, agriculture is the emperor's crown jewel. Taxes. Oh, there are plenty, and they're often paid in kind. You're not just growing rice for yourself. You're feeding the nation, and Uncle Sam, or rather Uncle Han, is always hungry. The government's grain storage is your insurance policy against droughts and floods, but it's also a reminder that the state's got its hand in your pocket, perpetually. While we're on the topic, let's bust another myth. The peasant as the downtrodden, hapless victim. Sure, life isn't a stroll through the imperial gardens, but peasants hold a certain economic power. You produce the food, you drive the local markets, and in some strokes of history, you've even been the spark that ignites revolutions. Remember the Yellow Turban Rebellion in the late 2nd century? That was your brethren, tired of oppressive taxes and corruption, shaking up the status quo. But back to your morning grind. Breakfast is a simplistic affair. No Instagram-worthy avocado toast here. Think congee, that hearty rice porridge, sometimes jazzed up with pickled vegetables if you're lucky. It's fuel, plain and simple, to get you through the back-breaking labor ahead. There's no time for leisurely meals. The fields are calling your name, and you've got daylight to chase. As you trudge out to the fields, remember that your role in this agrarian society is more than just a cog in the wheel. You're part of a grand, interconnected system that feeds not just bellies, but also the ambitions of emperors and the dreams of philosophers. This is a world where the toil of your hands supports the silk-robed scholars and courtiers lounging in palatial opulence miles away. Every grain of rice you plant is a testament to the intricate web of dependency and power that defines ancient China. So there you are, knee-deep in the muck, sweat trickling down your brow as the sun finally spills over the horizon. You pause for a moment, maybe to stretch out your aching back or to wipe the sweat from your eyes. And in that moment, you realize that the rhythm of your life, this relentless cycle of planting and harvesting, is the very heartbeat of an empire. The reality is gritty, the labor is hard, but the significance, well, that's as vast as the empire itself. And just like that, as the sun hits its zenith, it's time to break for midday activities. But hold your horses, or rather, your oxen, because this isn't a leisurely siesta. In ancient China, the midday break is less about lounging and more about logistics. Picture a bustling scene, families coming together, not just for a meal, but for a miniature community meeting. It's a chance to catch up on the latest village gossip and strategize the afternoon's work. Now, let's talk about lunch. Forget your artisanal sandwich or kale salad. We're talking another round of congee, maybe with a smattering of fermented tofu if you're feeling fancy. It's quick, it's filling, and it's a reminder that in this world, food is fuel, not a culinary experience. As you gulp down your meal, your ears are tuned to the chatter around you. This is where the role of family and community takes center stage. Family in ancient China isn't just about the nuclear unit. It's a sprawling network that includes extended kin, and by extension, the entire village. You're not just a farmer, you're part of a complex social tapestry. There's a status quo to maintain, a hierarchy where elders are revered, and decisions are often made collectively. It's like being in a never-ending group project, but with rice paddies instead of PowerPoint slides. And here's a kicker. Your obligations extend beyond just the family. Enter the local lord or landowner, whose title might sound like something out of a medieval drama, but is very much a reality of your life. You owe him your allegiance, not by choice but by necessity. Land ownership in ancient China is a privilege reserved for the elite, and you, dear peasant, are the worker bee ensuring the hive thrives. It's a symbiotic relationship, but let's be honest, the scales aren't exactly balanced. You're paying taxes, and not just in the form of cash or crops. Sometimes it's labor, sometimes it's goods, but it's always a reminder of who calls the shots. Let's bust another myth while we're at it. The idyllic village life, where everyone sings Cumbare and shares everything, is more fantasy than fact. Sure, cooperation is the name of the game. Planting, harvesting, and even local festivals are communal affairs. But there's also a pecking order. Social hierarchies are as present as the air you breathe. The village headman, often a wealthy farmer or minor official, holds sway over local matters. His word carries weight, and his favor can make or break a season. It's a delicate dance of power, where knowing your place is as important as knowing when to plant the next crop. Now, about those romanticized views of pastoral harmony. Oh, how the poets and philosophers love to wax lyrical about the simplicity of rural life. But let's get real. It's not a never-ending painting of serenity. Meeting quotas and taxes is like a sword hanging over your head, a constant reminder of the empire's demands. Miss a quota, and you're not just risking a scolding. You're flirting with financial ruin, or worse, the wrath of your local lord. There's a saying, heaven is high, and the emperor is far away. But don't be fooled. His influence through local officials reaches right into your rice bowl. So here you are in the middle of this intricate dance where every step counts, and the stakes are as high as the mountains. Yet, despite the grind, there's an undeniable resilience in your community. This is a world where mutual aid isn't just a nice idea, it's a survival tactic. During festivals or in times of need, the village comes alive with a spirit of cooperation that's as tangible as the soil under your feet. It's a testament to human nature, the power of unity in the face of endless toil. As the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows over the fields, you prepare for the afternoon push. Your muscles ache, your clothes are stained with the earth's bounty, but there's work to be done. The rhythm of your life is dictated by the seasons, by the land, and by the people around you. It's a cycle as ancient as time, with challenges as old as the hills. Yet there's a certain beauty in it, a relentless drive that keeps you moving, keeps you striving. So, as you head back to the fields, ready to tackle the second half of your day, remember this. You're part of a legacy, a living history that feeds empires and fuels dreams. The road is long, the work is hard, but the story, oh, it's one for the ages. Keep your chin up and your plow steady, because this tale is far from over. And off you go, trudging back to the fields, your plow in hand and your resolve unyielding. The afternoon sun isn't known for its mercy, but neither are those never-ending rows of rice plants. As the sun dips lower, casting those dramatic shadows, you dive straight into the gritty reality of your afternoon tasks, where sweat is your constant companion and the horizon your only witness. Let's break down the tools of your trade. Think of your plow as the ancient equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. It's not flashy, but it gets the job done. Crafted from wood and iron, it's both your best friend and worst enemy. Best friend because it turns soil with the grace of a trained dancer, and worst enemy because it's a backbreaker, plain and simple. This rudimentary technology hasn't changed much over the centuries, a testament to its effectiveness, or perhaps to the stubbornness of tradition. Either way, it's your lifeline in a world where the phrase, manual labor, doesn't even scratch the surface. Now, let's tackle a popular myth, that ancient Chinese technology was static, stuck in a time warp while the rest of the world moved on. Not quite. Sure, technological advancements didn't arrive with the speed of a broadband connection, but when they did, they were game changers. Take the iron plough itself, introduced during the Han Dynasty. It was a quantum leap from wooden predecessors, cutting deeper into the soil and making your life a speck less grueling, at least on a good day. And speaking of innovation, let's not forget the water wheel, a marvel of ancient engineering that turned the labor-intensive job of irrigation into something approaching efficiency. Imagine this, a wheel powered by the river's current, lifting water with grace and precision, channeling it to your fields. It's not exactly sorcery, but when your livelihood hangs in the balance, it might as well be. These ingenious devices were the unsung heroes of agricultural life, quietly transforming the landscape without demanding a parade. But hold your horses, or more accurately, your water buffalo. The pace of technological change in rural areas wasn't exactly breakneck. It's not that the peasantry was resistant to innovation. It's that the infrastructure to spread these advances was as slow as a tortoise on a lazy Sunday. In an empire as vast as China, with its dizzying array of dialects and terrains, getting the latest tech to the farthest reaches was about as simple as teaching a cat to fetch. Now, let's get down to brass tacks, the economics of innovation. The introduction of iron tools and water management systems didn't come cheap. These weren't impulse buys you could snag on a whim. They often required pooling resources within the community or, gulp, taking on debt. So while the tools were there to make your life easier, they also came with a price tag that could make a dragon blush. It was a classic case of short-term pain for long-term gain. You were smack dab in the middle of it. And now, let's bust another myth wide open. The idyllic image of the village blacksmith as a lone genius, hammering away in his forge, dreaming up inventions that would change the world. The reality, it was teamwork that made the dream work. Innovation was a communal affair, born out of necessity and refined through collective effort. Your community was the original think tank, minus the whiteboards and beanbags. As the afternoon wears on, your tasks shift from ploughing to patchwork repairs. Broken tools are a constant thorn in your side, and you wield your hammer like a conductor's baton, coaxing music from metal. Repairs are as much a part of your life as planting and harvesting, a never-ending cycle of break, fix, repeat. It's a reminder that in this world, nothing is disposable. Everything has value, even if it's held together with bits of twine and a prayer. And here's where the political landscape casts its long shadow. The state, ever the benevolent overlord, was always eager to take a cut of your produce, but it wasn't entirely blind to the benefits of technological progress. During prosperous times, the government might distribute improved tools or offer tax breaks to promote agricultural efficiency. But in lean years, don't hold your breath waiting for a handout. It's a delicate dance, balancing the needs of the state with the realities of rural life, and you're caught in the middle, doing a jig to the tune of imperial policies. As the sun begins its descent, painting the sky with hues that would make an artist weep, you pause to take stock. Your muscles scream for mercy, your hands are calloused from toil, but there's a certain satisfaction in the work. You've tilled the earth, nurtured life, and contributed to the grand tapestry of an empire. It's a moment to reflect on the unbroken chain of history, where each generation builds on the last, inching ever forward, one muddy step at a time. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and cast a glance at the horizon, remember this. You're not just a cog in the machine, but a vital link in the chain. The tools of your trade may be simple, the pace of change may be slow, but your role is anything but insignificant. You're part of a legacy, a living testament to human resilience and ingenuity. And while the road ahead is long and fraught with challenges, the journey is far from over. So keep your plow sharp and your spirit sharper, because this epic tale of toil and triumph has many chapters yet to unfold. As the sun dips below the horizon, leaving you with nothing but the glow of a sky painted in hues of orange and pink, it's time to swap out the tools of labor for something a bit more introspective. You've spent the day in the fields, wrestling with nature and the whims of ancient economies. But now, as twilight creeps in, it's time to dive into the cultural and spiritual tapestry that stitches your community together. First up, let's talk about ancestor worship. In ancient China, your lineage isn't just a family tree, it's the entire forest. The spirits of your ancestors are believed to be hanging around, watching your every move, like cosmic CCTV. It's a belief system that's less about spooky hauntings and more about maintaining harmony. These spirits are considered guardians, and the family altar is their hangout spot. Here's a fun fact. The rituals you perform aren't just for show. They're a way of ensuring that the spirits are on your side. Miss a ritual, and you're not just risking a ghostly side-eye. You're potentially inviting misfortune into your life. Ancestor worship isn't just a personal affair. It's a community one. The local temple is where families come together to perform collective rites, a communal effort to keep the spirits appeased and the crops bountiful. It's a spiritual insurance policy, and the premiums are paid in offerings of food, incense, and the occasional sacrificial chicken. It's a grim reminder that even in the afterlife, your ancestors are keeping tabs on your contributions to the family potluck. Now, let's waltz on over to local festivals, which are the ancient equivalent of hitting the pause button on your grueling workday. These events are a riot of color, sound, and communal joy. Think of them as the Super Bowl, Thanksgiving, and New Year's Eve rolled into one, with a side of dragon dancing and fireworks. Festivals like the Spring Festival or Mid-Autumn Festival aren't just excuses to blow off steam. They're vital for reinforcing social bonds and community cohesion. During these festivals, you indulge in rare treats, cakes, meats, and if you're lucky, a sip of rice wine that could probably double as paint thinner. These celebrations are a brief respite from the grind, a chance to let your hair down and maybe, just maybe, win a round of gambling at the local fair. But beneath the revelry, there's a deeper purpose, honoring the cycles of nature and ensuring the favor of the gods. It's a time when the village comes alive with the clamor of drums and laughter, a momentary escape from the relentless demands of daily life. But before we get too swept up in the romance of it all, let's bust a myth open. The idea that festivals were grand egalitarian celebrations where everyone mingled freely. Not quite. Social hierarchies still made their presence felt, even in the midst of revelry. The village headmen and local elites often had the best seats, literally and figuratively, while the rest of you made do with whatever space was left. It's a reminder that even in celebration, you're not entirely free from the social pecking order. And speaking of order, let's peek into the realm of education. Limited, sure, but significant nonetheless. Formal education in ancient China is a privilege reserved for the few, not the many. If you're thinking of a classroom with neatly aligned desks and a blackboard, think again. Education here is often informal, taking place under a tree or in a communal hall. The curriculum, mostly Confucian classics, a cocktail of philosophy and moral instruction designed to mold you into a model citizen. The reality is that most peasants had little access to education, their days consumed by the demands of the land. However, for those who could catch a break, thanks to a wealthy patron or sheer luck, education offered a ladder to social mobility, albeit a rickety one. Literate peasant could aspire to become a scholar official, climbing the ranks of the imperial bureaucracy. It's a long shot, sure, but in a world where the odds are constantly stacked against you, even the faintest glimmer of opportunity can be a beacon. There's a saying from Confucius, "He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger." It's a reminder that education isn't just about rote learning. It's about cultivating wisdom. For the few who manage to crack open the door to literacy, the world broadens beyond the rice paddies. It's like upgrading from a dial-up connection to fiber optic. A whole new universe of knowledge and possibility opens up. And now, let's address the elephant in the room, the gap between urban sophistication and rural realities. While the imperial courts and bustling cities flaunt their silk robes, intricate poetry, and philosophical debates, your life in the countryside is a world away. Urban centers are the hubs of culture and innovation, where scholars debate the finer points of Confucian ethics while sipping tea in tranquil gardens. Meanwhile, you're in the fields, pondering the ethics of which crop to plant next. This cultural gap isn't just a geographical divide, it's a chasm of opportunity and lifestyle. The cities are buzzing hives of activity, where the latest ideas and technologies are born and bred. They're places where the elite gather to shape policy and dictate the cultural narrative. For you, the rural peasant, these urban wonders are stories you hear secondhand, tales of distant lands where life seems to sparkle just a bit more. But before you start packing your bags for the city, consider this. The urban utopia is not without its own set of challenges. The allure of city life comes with its own price: crowded streets, rampant disease, and a cutthroat social ladder that's as slippery as it is steep. Sure, the city offers sophistication and opportunity, but it also demands a trade-off. the simplicity and community cohesion of rural life. So, as the last light of day fades and you prepare to retreat to your modest hut, you find solace in the knowledge that you're part of something larger, a culture that has endured for millennia, a society that thrives on resilience and interdependence. Your life, though filled with toil, is also rich with meaning and connection. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of tradition, belief, and unwavering human spirit. As night falls, you reflect on the day's labor, the rituals that bind you to your ancestors, and the festivals that bring your community together. You may not have the luxury of silk robes or scholarly debates, but you possess something just as valuable, a deep-rooted sense of belonging, a role in the grand narrative of an empire that, at its core, is built on the strength of its people. And as you drift into sleep, cradled by the sounds of the night and the whisper of the wind through the rice stalks, you carry with you the stories of those who came before and the hopes of those yet to come. The journey isn't over, not by a long shot. The road ahead is as unpredictable as the weather, but it is yours to travel one step, one season, one generation at a time. As you drift into sleep, the whispers of the wind through the rice stalks accompany you, a lullaby sung by the earth itself. Yet, even as you edge into dreams, the weight of the day's labors and the intricacies of your world linger in the back of your mind. Life in ancient China is not just a tale of rice and rituals, but a complex web spun between the peasantry and the powers that be, the ruling class whose edicts shape your existence more than the rising and setting of the sun. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the grand stage of politics, where emperors and officials weave policies that trickle down to your very doorstep. It's here in the twilight of your day that you reflect on the political landscape, because let's be honest, you're living under a system where the emperor is as much a deity as a ruler. In this world, the mandate of heaven is the ultimate trump card in the ruling class's deck. Lose it, and it's game over, as shown by dynasties that fell as swiftly as a poorly stacked house of bamboo cards. Speaking of mandates, let's talk taxes. Oh, the joys of taxation in ancient China, a veritable buffet of levies that could make even modern tax codes look forgiving. The government's reach is long, and its appetite insatiable. You're not just paying in grains. There are corvée labor obligations, a charming practice where you're invited to donate your time and sweat to public works projects, like building that great wall everyone raves about. For the ruling elite, it's like having a free construction crew. For you, it's a reminder that free is a relative term. But before we get too bogged down in the quagmire of imperial policies, let's acknowledge the allure of the emperor's court. It's a place of silk and splendor, where decisions are made with a flick of a brush on parchment. The romanticized vision of the court, with its banquets and poetry, often overlooks the harsh reality that these decisions ripple outward and land squarely on your shoulders. It's the age-old conundrum. The grandeur of the few rests on the labor of the many. And speaking of labor, let's not forget the occasional peasant revolts, those historical flare-ups that underscore a simple truth. Push people too far, and they push back. Yellow Turban Rebellion, for example, wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a full-on protest against oppressive taxes and corrupt officials. It's a reminder that history isn't just made by emperors and generals, but also by those who toil in the fields. Your ancestors weren't just passive players. They were the sparks that sometimes set the whole powder keg ablaze. Now, let's weigh the narratives of progress touted by those in power. The idea is seductive. A benevolent empire, where everyone plays their part in a grand design for prosperity. But here's the kicker. Progress often comes with strings attached. Those irrigation systems and roads you labor on, they're as much about control as they are about convenience. They bind the empire together, sure, but they also bind you to the empire, a reminder that your life is inextricably linked to the whims of those who rule. And as we delve into these layers of control, let's debunk the myth of the all-seeing emperor. The truth is, the imperial gaze is often more myopic than it seems. The emperor may sit atop a throne, but the real levers of power are often pulled by local officials who interpret imperial edicts in ways that suit their agendas. It's like a game of telephone, where the message starts clear, but gets muddled by the time it reaches your village. The saying, "Heaven is high, and the emperor is far away," takes on new meaning when you realize that the emperor's policies are filtered through layers of bureaucracy before they reach you. And now, as you wrap up your day, let's question the true costs of living in ancient China. The narratives of progress and prosperity are appealing, but they gloss over the sacrifices and struggles of everyday life. Yes, you're part of an empire that spans vast territories and commands great influence, but the price is often paid in sweat and blood. Your labor feeds the nation, but it also feeds the ambitions of a ruling class that's worlds away from the muck and mire of your daily grind. But let's not end on a somber note. There's a resilience in your story, a testament to human endurance and ingenuity. The legacy of ancient China isn't just one of emperors and conquests. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives like yours. Each day you till the soil, each grain you harvest, contributes to a narrative that stretches across the centuries. A narrative of survival, adaptation, and quiet triumph. And as you drift further into sleep, with the stars as your canopy and history as your pillow, remember this. You are part of a story that's bigger than any one emperor or era. It's a story of people who, against all odds, carved out a life in a world as unpredictable as the winds that whisper through the rice fields. So rest easy, for tomorrow you'll rise again to face the challenges and joys of another day in this ancient land, where every step you take is a dance with history, and every breath a testament to the enduring spirit of humanity.